Imagine crashing out of life as a total nobody, only to respawn inside the body of the Empire's biggest scumbag. Meet Chris, a dude with genius-level specs, capable of copying any skill with a single glance, literally a walking cheat code. But when the Demon King rose up and triggered the apocalypse, Chris figured it was game over for him and his hero squad. That is, until he snapped his eyes open 15 years in the past, reborn as a member of the Demon Clan itself. Yeah, the exact villain everyone wants on a pike. Now he is staring down a 5-year timer to flip the script, prevent the end of the world, and grind from rock bottom to become the Empire's strongest entity. Buckle up, fam, let's dive into this madness. We open on a scene dripping with pure despair. A voice cracks with gut-wrenching guilt. This is the end. The so-called hero Evan is breaking down, sobbing that he was too weak, admitting that Chris, not him, should have been the one leading the charge. But a girl cuts through the pity party, pulling him together. She insists they left it all on the field. Still, she drops a heavy truth bomb. If Chris, with his insane copycat talent, had just picked up a sword a little sooner, he might have shattered the 9-star limit and ascended to a 10-star legend. She muses that if that scenario had played out, maybe the two of them, Evan and Chris, could have actually stopped the apocalypse. Meanwhile, Chris, known famously as the Great Extra, because of his broken talent to master anything instantly, is reflecting on his own twisted path. He thinks about how he snagged that nickname by stacking up achievements like trophies. The saga of this Great Extra kicked off at age 20, the moment he bailed on his toxic clan, hustling in back alleys and dreaming of the big time. But when the Demon King of Carnage launched the invasion of the Magic Empire, kicking off the Age of Destruction, a recruitment flyer for the hero's party grabbed his attention. Chris instantly recognized it as a golden ticket, a once-in-a-lifetime shot to etch his name in history. He figured he'd survive the war and retire on a pile of gold. Spoiler alert, they failed hard. The Dominion of Light crumbled, swallowed whole by the Demon King. The girl whispers a desperate prayer. If only she could rewind the clock, she'd make sure Chris was the chosen one. Chris, however, is internally screaming no thanks. Even if he got a second playthrough, he has zero desire to run it back. One lifetime of hell was plenty, thank you very much. Besides, fantasizing is useless when the world is literally dissolving around them. Accepting that this is the grand finale, Chris makes one final cynical wish. If reincarnation is real, which he doubts, let him respawn as a filthy rich trust fund baby. That's the last thing firing through his neurons, before he blacks out and wakes up to the shock of a lifetime. Regression confirmed. But the vessel, he is now a young master in the Magic Empire. Specifically, he's in the Dark Magic Clan, one of the 12 pillars propping up the enemy empire. From what baby-faced Chris can piece together, he has been yeeted back 15 years into the past. That leaves him roughly 5 years before the Age of Destruction kicks off. Staring out the window, Chris is reeling. He thought he'd seen everything in his previous run. But watching a demonic beast casually gardening, that's a new one. However, the landscape isn't the problem. Chris looks in the mirror and his blood runs cold. He knows this face. It belongs to Christian von Baron Kazar. A memory unlocks a casual lunch chat with a girl from his past life. He had asked, since the guy had Vaughn in the middle, didn't that make him a fiend from a branch family? The girl had nodded, confirming the house of Count Kazar was an offshoot of Baron Countier, basically dark magic royalty. Chris had assumed that meant they were second-rate. The girl shut that down fast. Branch family or not, they had massive clout in the Dark Magic Clan, and their bank accounts were bottomless. She doubted there was a single soul in the Magic Empire who didn't fear that name. Then, Chris remembered the tea she spilled about the heirs. The family had 2 potential successors, but the eldest, Christian, a total piece of trash, a troublemaker so toxic even his own father, the Count, washed his hands of him. The girl had waved it off as old news. Chris asked if Christian ever got his act together, and her answer was, a jaw-dropper. Christian was assassinated by his own relatives. As that memory hits, Chris slams his fist against the mirror. He's furious. He just wanted the soft life of a random, rich kid. So why did the universe RNG drop him into a chaotic bastard destined for an early grave? Trembling with dread, Chris leans on the glass, frantically strategizing. Here's the sitrep he has. Somehow possessed the body of a boy with a similar name awakening about 3 days ago. And he knew the clock was ticking. Christian had exactly 2 years left to live, and considering the Khazar family practically worshipped honor, the fact that Christian was already on the chopping block meant he was absolute trash in their eyes. The game plan seemed simple enough: lay low, play nice, and maybe, just maybe, he could dodge the Reaper. Or better yet, since he'd reincarnated as a filthy rich noble, why not just cash in and live the high life? Smack. He slapped his own forehead as reality hit him. That fantasy was dead on arrival. The Demon King of Carnage didn't launch this war for kicks. He was serving up humanity on a silver platter to trigger Ragnarok. By the time anyone caught on, it was already game over. The Dominion of Light, the Magic Empire, both wiped off the map. If Chris wanted to survive, he had to single-handedly cancel the apocalypse. Sure, the Demon King pulled the trigger, but his army of fanatical fiends was the real nightmare. To stop this train wreck, just being strong wasn't going to cut it. He needed more. He had to become a monster scarier than the Demon King himself. There was only one play here: seize the throne as the Demon Emperor and rule the entire magic empire. Chris figured, with 5 years before the Age of Destruction kicks off, he might as well go all in. If he wins, he takes it all. Slam! A hand pounded the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot, shifting the scene to a furious Count Khazar. The Count was livid, screaming that he'd ordered his son to stay locked in his room. Christian just knelt there, taking the heat. He said nothing as his father raged on, disgusted that Christian had the audacity to show his face. After the disaster he'd caused, the warning was clear: step out of line one more time, and his head would be separated from his neck. A chill ran down Christian's spine. The Count's killing intent was suffocating. If Chris wanted to execute his master plan, he had to shred the useless trash label Christian had earned. So he swallowed his pride. "I'm here to apologize, Father, for everything I've done until now." Count Khazar actually flinched, physically taken aback. He stared at his son like he'd grown a second head. Christian pressed on, swearing those days were over. But the Count, he wasn't buying what the kid was selling. Not for a second. "Are you mocking me?" he spat. How could he trust a word out of his mouth when Christian had pulled another stunt just days ago? Honestly, Chris drew a blank. Which disaster was it this time? Christian's rap sheet was so long he couldn't even pick a specific crime. But Chris, smooth as silk, improvised on the spot. "I know I broke your trust, and that's on me. But, were you aware I lost a chunk of my memories 3 days ago?" He reasoned that. Trying to reclaim those memories made him reflect on his past. And he realized what a scumbag he'd been. But Count Khazar wasn't having it. "I've heard these excuses 1,000 times. "Exactly," Christian countered. "Words are cheap, that's why I'm done talking. I want to prove it with action. Send me to the punishment cave. Leave me there for 1 month, and I'll show you a completely different person." Now, this wasn't just any timeout corner. It was a sensory deprivation hell for elite fiends. Pitch black, zero sound, all 5 senses gone. A few days in there would turn a normal brain to mush. But for Chris, it was perfect. He needed a hole to crawl into, away from prying eyes. Count Khazar looked at him like he was insane. "You want to lock yourself in there? For a month? Boy, you wouldn't last 24 hours. "I know it's hell," Christian admitted, "but that's the bare minimum price to earn back your respect." The Count was genuinely rattled now. How many times had they had this talk, only to end in disappointment? But he decided to roll the dice one last time. He'd play along. "Fine," he growled. "But hear this warning: if you walk out of that cave, the same pathetic whelp, then you are banished from this clan forever." Christian clenched his fists tight. Without the family name, he was a dead man walking. The list of people waiting to put a knife in his back was miles long. So without a second of hesitation, he looked his father dead in the eye. He lays down the terms: if he can prove he's a changed man, the old man has to grant him exactly one wish. Count Khazar glared down at his son, roaring that he sounded way too cocky for someone who hadn't even survived yet. But Chris stood his ground. The deal was simple: if he walked out of there a new man, the Count owed him a blank check. "I doubt trash like you can change," the Count scoffed, turning his heel and storming out of the room. Cut to the next scene. Chris is chilling in a chair, toying with an object in his hand when Cox interrupts him. Cox, the half-vampire butler of House Khazar, announces that the punishment cave is ready. Chris pockets his trinket and rises to his feet. It's go time. As they walk the hallway, Chris's senses sharpen, picking up the hushed gossip, echoing behind his back. The servants are buzzing, wondering why the family screw-up volunteered for the torture chamber. "What's his angle?" they muttered. Then the conversation shifts to his latest disaster. That time he insulted the heiress of the poison magic clan, a mess so bad the Count had to personally beg for forgiveness. Chris clenched his jaw, listening to them discuss the humiliation of bowing to a rival clan. When will he grow up, they sneered. Then came the betting pool. They were wagering on his survival time. "I give him 2 days tops," one laughed. Moments later, Christian and Cox arrived at the ominous entrance of the punishment cave. Chris eyed the Death Knight standing guard, fitting security for the magic empire. He ran a hand through his hair, figuring, at least they kept unwanted guests out. Suddenly, a voice cuts through the air. Chris spins around to see a familiar face, calling him Big Brother. It's Christian's biological little brother, and the family's golden child, Thurn von Baron Khazar. But the reunion is short-lived. Thurn instantly draws his blade on Chris. Chris freezes for a split second, masking his fear with a stone-cold poker face. "Can I help you?" he asks flatly. "Because that doesn't look like a goodbye present." Thurn's face is twisted in stern rage. He points the sword, reminding Christian that he is a stain on the family name. He admits he doesn't know what scheme Chris is cooking up, but he drops a lethal warning: "Sully our honor again and I'll end you myself." With cold steel pressing against Christian's throat, he demands to know if the message was received. As the blade digs a little deeper, it clicks for Chris. In the original timeline, it must have been Thurn, who ultimately killed Christian. Chris flashes back to the Age of Destruction. He remembers Thurn as a notorious fiend who mastered curse magic. Honestly, seeing him as a kid now is kinda adorable. Beside them, Cox is losing his mind seeing the young master at knife point. But Chris stays icy calm. He casually pushes the sword away with his bare hand. The kid has trained hard, he notes. But compared to the apocalypse, to a guy who survived the worst the Age of Destruction had to offer, Thurn is just a brat. Sweat trickles down Thurn's face as he glares at his brother. What did you say? Chris just shrugs. I said, I got it. But Thurn isn't finished lecturing. However, Chris doesn't have time for this. Without a word, he turns and walks straight into the gate, leaving Thurn and Cox with their jaws on the floor. Thurn screams at the closing door, absolutely losing it over Christian's new attitude. Inside the cave, total sensory blackout hits. Blind and deaf Chris realizes the only thing left is a faint buzz in his fingertips, probably designed so prisoners can find food and not starve to death. He tries to look at his hands, seeing nothing. He realizes your average person would go insane in this void within hours. But this is irrelevant to him. As a former treasure hunter, he survived way worse hellholes than this. Actually shutting down his 5 senses is exactly what he needed. It forces him to look inward. Hand on his heart, he knows this is the only way to overhaul this trash body. It's going to take luck and time. But he has the cheat codes, the medical skills he ground out as the divine doctor, the bone compression art. He adapted from that circus body modification technique, and finally, a stash of elemental magic stones. He's confident he can pull this off. Gripping the stone he was toying with earlier, he smirks. In his past life, he never dreamed of getting his hands on these rare items, since they cost a fortune. But hey, waking up in a rich kid's body definitely has its perks. The perks of high nobility were sweet. The clan had to bow to his whims, even if they looked at him like he was total trash. He let out a dark chuckle. In his past life, he clawed through hell for scraps like this. Now, handed on a silver platter, game time. He grabbed the white magic stone, the ultimate detox tool, to kickstart his evolution. It was a snooze fest, but you can't build a skyscraper without a foundation. He dropped into a lotus position, ready to grind. Time to scrub every ounce of toxic sludge from his mana veins with pure white energy. He knew the stakes. One slip-up meant a total nervous system meltdown. But for a pro like him, this was a walk in the park. Meanwhile, Cox stood trembling in Count Khazar's office. The Count demanded a status report on the prodigal son. Cox stuttered that Christian walked into the punishment cave without a fight, but he feared the isolation would shatter the boy's mind before he could even scream for help. Khazar's stoic mask slipped. Did he push too hard? He remembered a time when Christian was the clan's golden child. How did a prodigy crash and burn so fast he couldn't wrap his head around it? Was it raw talent that bred that arrogance? Didn't matter now. Khazar clenched his fist. He'd rather see his son dead than living as a disgrace. A tiny spark of hope ignited. He remembered Christian's vow to let his actions do the talking. But Khazar crushed that thought instantly. He knew better than to trust a serial liar. His eyes snapped back to Cox. Did you see anything odd? Khazar sensed the servant's fear. Lie to me and you're finished. Terrified, Cox spilled his guts. He took magic stones inside with him. Khazar slammed his fist on the desk. Cox flinched, rushing to finish. He took dreamstones, my lord, the hallucinogenic ones. We have to get him out, Cox pleaded. He didn't know the dangers, but the Count's cold aura silenced him. No, Khazar, stated his voice like ice. If he's that foolish, let him die there. 1 month later, the Count stood before the imposing gates of the punishment cave. Judgment Day. He expected a broken shell of a man. But as the heavy stone doors ground open, Khazar's eyes widened. Standing there wasn't a victim, but a calm, collected Christian smiling like he just left a spa. Been waiting for you, Father, Christian quipped. Silence. You look surprised. Did you think I'd be crawling out? I told you I'd be a new man. The Count scrutinized his son, and for the first time in years, he saw it. That fire. The same predator's gaze Christian had as a child. Khazar masked his relief. So you survived the cave, he said flatly. Christian threw his hands on his hips. Was that a compliment I heard? Khazar crossed his arms, unimpressed. Don't get cocky. This is the bare minimum. Trust is earned, not given. Christian suppressed a sigh. This old man was tougher than a rusted shield. Fair enough, Christian shrugged. I'll just have to try harder. But internally he was grinning. His dad probably thought he spent the month crying in the dark. Wrong. He was too busy leveling up to be bored. Step 1. Reconstruct his physique for peak performance. He needed a vessel capable of god-tier swordsmanship. Thanks to that white mana stone, every cell in his body was supercharged. And the Dreamstone absolute game changer. He flashed back to Cox's ghost-pale face, begging him not to take the cursed stone inside. Cox saw a narcotic. Christian saw opportunity. Thank God for stubbornness. Those hallucinations were a blessing. They put his mental training on hyperspeed, slashing the metamorphosis time in half. The result, he forged 2 mana cores. He even unlocked a 1-star light spell in that hellhole. He smirked inwardly. I am a literal genius. Of course he cloaked the light core with his darkness core. If the clan found out he wielded opposing elements, they'd lose their minds. But the cave held one last secret. Just as he was wrapping up, a sound echoed from the shadows. He spun around to find the Dreamstone sitting there. He smirked at the darkness. A parting gift. He realized the truth then. Someone planted this. They wanted him, high, addicted, and broken. Joke's on them. He'd used their trap as fuel for his ascent. Snapping back to the present, he looked his father in the eye. Deal sealed, promise kept. Now it was time to cash in. The Count's jaw clenched tight enough to crack a tooth, but he signaled for him to spill it. So Christian dropped the bomb. He wanted access to the Black Swamp Knights' training grounds. The request sucked the air out of the room. A shadow fell over the Count's face. He couldn't wrap his head around the sheer audacity. Why would a total waste of space like Christian even dream of stepping foot in that arena? We're talking about one of the big 3 orders backing the Dark Magic clan. Only the absolute beasts display their skills there. Sensing his dad's rising blood pressure, Christian went into damage control. Relax, I just want to borrow the space. He claimed that witnessing the raw power of the Black Swamp Knights would be the ultimate motivation for him. He quickly added, don't worry, I'm not trying to join the squad. That left the Count stunned into silence. After mulling it over, the Count turned his back, grumbling a reluctant fine, but not before issuing a sharp warning. If you embarrass the family out there. But Christian cut him off with a breezy got it, loud and clear. Just as the Count turned to leave, Christian threw in a curveball. Oh, there's one other thing I need. Next scene, boom, Christian struts right into the Knight's territory. Every head turned, confusion painted on their faces. The whispers started immediately. What is that useless Nepo baby doing here? Christian heard every word, but he knew the score. In the Magic Empire, clout doesn't matter, only power does. That's the only reason they dared to trash talk the boss's son. But Christian had a hidden agenda. The real mission, getting inside the library, his second request. His dad had set a quest condition, snag a letter of recommendation from Deputy Commander Melon. Only then would he hand over the key. And Christian was desperate to get into that library. That's where the Count's entire stash of dark magic grimoires was locked away. To master the dark arts, he needed inside access. Flashback to the punishment cave gate. Christian had asked, why the extra hurdles? I'm still part of the clan, right? The Count hit him with a reality check. Remember when you stole advanced grimoires and pawned them on the black market? And for pennies no less. Christian cringed hard. The previous owner of this body really was a hopeless screw-up. Back in the present, Christian gripped his sword. He had to shake off the past and focus. Mission number 1. Impress the deputy commander. No screw-ups allowed. Before he could even warm up, the knights swarmed him like sharks. Leading the pack was Thurn. One of the knights stepped up Thurn, sneering that a worm like Christian didn't belong on this hallowed ground. Recognizing his little brother leading the roast session, Christian sighed internally. This kid is such a headache. Then a light bulb moment. A smirk tugged at Christian's lips. Actually, this drama might be the perfect setup. Thurn stomped over, getting right in his face. This is your last warning. Get lost. He mocked. You barely survived the punishment cave. You really want to throw that life away? Christian looked at his little bro, cool as ice. With a calm smile, he clapped back. You sure about that? Dad's the one who let me in. Thurn froze, totally shook. But before he could stutter a comeback, a cold female voice cut through the air. I respect the Count's orders, but I don't trust you as far as I can throw you. Christian spun around. It was Deputy Commander Melon, and she wasn't just talking, she was radiating, suffocating 4-star dark magic. It was a clear intimidation tactic. She wanted him to wet his pants and run, but Christian he's seen worse. He simply bowed his head respectfully. Greetings, Deputy Commander. Melon blinked, surprised he wasn't trembling on the floor. Christian didn't miss a beat. Since you're here, I guess talking won't cut it. I'll just have to prove I belong in this arena. He dropped the gauntlet. Let me duel one of your knights. Right here, right now. And I'll win. The crowd went dead silent. Stunned faces everywhere. Christian kept his cool. I'm dead serious. But one condition, no dark energy. He had to be smart, his wasted body couldn't handle the heavy stuff yet. His mana tank was basically empty from years of partying. He crossed his arms, looking unbothered. Pure combat. Unarmed duel preferred. Melon paused, actually considering the handicap. She knew it would be a PR nightmare if the air got destroyed, but she had to ask. You think you stand a chance without magic? Christian flashed an innocent, confident smile. Watch me. As for my opponent. He pointed a finger straight at his brother. I choose Thurn. Thurn looked like he'd just been slapped. With a glare scorching enough to rival the sun, he muttered under his breath the audacity of this guy. Melon, however, cut in, suggesting Christian should stay in his lane and pick a punching bag actually on his level. Because Thorn was sitting pretty at 2 stars, a tier no normal 13-year-old could touch. Without raw talent, it didn't matter if you were 13 or 23. You wouldn't even scratch the surface of that kind of power. But Christian stood there, arms crossed, radiating main character energy, knowing damn well he wasn't just some random illegitimate child. He shook his head at Melon, declaring that if he was going to prove his worth, he needed to beat someone superior, and Thorn was the perfect target. Eyes burning with malice and challenge, he turned to Thorn and taunted him, asking if he was terrified of his big brother. Seething, Thorn hissed that he accepted the challenge. Instantly, the students swarmed into a circle, most of them hyping Thorn up, screaming for the prodigy to absolutely destroy the bastard. Christian tuned out the noise, cracking his knuckles with a satisfying pop before asking Melon how victory would be decided, and if they were going until one of them tapped out. Melon, hearing this, looked at Christian like he was insane, clearly thinking he didn't know his place. She scoffed, saying surrender was too boring, and declared they would fight until someone was physically incapacitated. She said it with a twisted hope, secretly praying Thorn would snap a leg or two and leave Christian permanently crippled. Hearing the rules, Christian spun toward his brother, feigning absolute terror, mocking him about the brutal beatdown incoming, since apparently Thorn was about to get serious. The mockery triggered Thorn, making him scream at his brother, vowing to shut his mouth for good. But before Thorn could even twitch a muscle, Christian blitzed in and slammed a fist into his face, snapping his head back from the impact. Christian smirked at the wide-eyed Thorn, announcing that class was already in session. Wiping the sting from his cheek, Thorn swung back wildly, but Christian dodged the punch with effortless grace. It felt like cheating to Christian, because as a low-level fiend with 0 stars, he knew he'd get crushed in a magic battle against dark energy. But in a bare-knuckle brawl, he was a grandmaster with a past life full of bloodshed. Seizing the opening, Christian drove a brutal kick into Thorn's gut, folding him over like a lawn chair. Besides, Christian mused that if he counted the dominion of light powers, he'd grind it out in the punishment cave. He was technically already at a 3-star level. Seeing their golden boy hunched over in agony, the crowd gasped, unable to process the sight. Christian loomed over his little brother, dropping into that fake mocking baby voice to ask if he was going to cry or needed someone to blow on his boo-boo. Despite being enraged beyond belief, Thorn calmly asked what dirty trick he'd used. But Christian, who was internally on cloud 9, seeing his brother humbled, simply shrugged, saying there was no trick. Maybe Thorn was just weak. That insult hit home, and Thorn snapped his head up, muttering, "Fine, let's go again," which just earned him more mockery. But Thorn had reached his limit, and channeling his dark magic, he lunged at Christian, screaming that he was going to murder him. But Christian danced around the attack again, complimenting Thorn's speed, while casually letting his brother throw hands at empty air. Once he was bored, he blocked a strike, and the moment his skin contacted Thorn's, Thorn felt his dark energy fizzle out. This threw Thorn into a panic, and Christian, who knew fighting was 90% instinct, capitalized on the confusion, launching a single devastating punch that sent Thorn crashing into the dirt. The crowd stood there with their jaws on the floor, staring at Thorn's prone body, refusing to believe their idol got dropped, immediately coping by speculating that Thorn must have powered down because he was too nice to hurt Christian. Nobody could make sense of the upset. Christian, job done, turned to Melon and asked if that was sufficient proof that he was qualified. Melon, stunned, had no choice but to say yes. Satisfied with the outcome, Christian slapped on an innocent mask while mentally preparing to devour every scrap of knowledge, whether it was swordsmanship or sorcery. Later, chilling in his room, Christian examined his dark magic, which he'd finally managed to push to 1 star. But since he was still a rookie at handling dark energy, the process took way longer than expected, and the corrupted residue left by the previous owner was definitely dragging out the grind. He rang the butler bell, realizing that, to wield the power of light simultaneously, he was going to need to power level even harder. If only it were that simple. Enter Marie gliding up to Christian. She wasn't just a maid, she was a walking red flag, reminding Christian of the absolute chaos he must have unleashed in the past. I mean, he got assigned a high-tier evil spirit, a literal banshee, as a servant. Note to self: fire and replace her as soon as possible. Juice. Now he ordered, needing to bounce for training. But Marie had a twist on the menu. Shall I prepare it with fresh human blood? Master Christian didn't blink. Strawberry. Obviously. Suddenly, the air turned ice cold. Marie leaned in, invading his personal space, whispering about how delicious that crimson nectar tastes. After some intense back and forth about the beverage menu, blood versus strawberries, Christian finally prepped his gear. But just as he was making his exit, Cox flagged him down. Christian spun around. Cox was playing the concerned parent card, asking if he was really hitting the training grounds this early. He claimed he was worried Christian was grinding too hard. But Christian sensed the fake vibes instantly. Cox kept yapping, saying he was so proud of this diligence, claiming he was the only one who believed in Christian, when the whole world was hating on him. That statement triggered Christian's radar. He cut him off cold. Who do you think you are? You don't get to decide whether to believe in your master. It was a power move, because Christian never asked for this guy's validation. Cox froze, realized he messed up, and frantically apologized for crossing the line. He muttered some luck for the training, and bolted. Christian, however, stood there like a statue watching Cox disappear. His gut was screaming that this guy was acting sus. Whatever, he kept it moving. Arriving at the training grounds, the atmosphere had shifted. The other students looked way more tamed than before, and since their guard was down, he figured it was the perfect time to start winning hearts and minds. He dropped his duffel bag, but he'd already been spotted. A snitch saw him and sprinted straight to the deputy commander's tent to report that Christian was back on the field. This sent Melon spiraling into deep tactical analysis. What is this guy plotting? She replayed the duel between Christian and Thurn from yesterday. Thurn had skills, no doubt, but Christian shut down Thurn's dark magic with surgical precision, exactly when it mattered. Did he read the flow of battle? If his combat IQ is that high, he might even rival Lord Eshed de Baron, the golden boy of the main family. She shook her head. Nah, impossible. She still viewed Christian as the trash-tier illegitimate child. The guy partied away all his dark energy years ago. There's no way he bridged that power gap. That was her final thought before a massive crash erupted outside. What's the drama now? She yelled, rushing out. A student filled her in. Christian just had a little disagreement with a squire. She looked over and froze. Christian was towering over an unconscious body, sword in hand. The crowd was paralyzed, totally confused because the guy on the ground was Cannon, a legit one-star fiend. Melon's eyes almost popped out. Christian actually leveled up to 1 star. He turned his gaze to Melon, voice dripping with sarcasm. I came to see the legendary power of the Black Swamp Knights. But honestly, you guys are not living up to the hype. He scanned the crowd, asking if anyone else wanted to step up, mocking them for being a squad of cowards. That triggered them. One night Torin stepped forward to defend their honor. Christian just stood there, relaxed, smirking because they walked right into his trap. Torin charged, sword raised, ready to end him. Clang. Christian blocked it like it was nothing. He didn't expect them to give him a free tutorial on their secret arts. But hey, if they're offering, he's stealing it. Christian shoved Torin's blade aside, adjusting his own grip. He downloaded the data instantly. The angle, the footwork, it was the mud swordsmanship. He'd only heard the rumors, but he figured a rough copy-paste job would do the trick. He mirrored the stance and unleashed their own move right back at Torin, sending him straight to the dirt, out cold. Christian literally sat on his defeated opponent, flexing on the entire crowd. The students were shook. They couldn't process that the good-for-nothing failure was actually a beast. Melon just stared stunned. She realized her gut instinct wasn't wrong. He is dangerous. Christian wasn't impressed. In fact, he's roasting them, joking about how disappointed he is, since he actually had high hopes for these knights. He doesn't let up, throwing shade right in their faces. He tells them if their skills are this trash, then the deputy commander needs to take the heat for it. You could hear a pin drop. The knights are completely shook by the accusation. Melon isn't having it. She admits he caught a victory today, but warns him to check his ego before he wrecks it. Christian stands up dead serious. He points right at Melon and dares her to show him exactly what the Black Knights are made of. That hits a nerve. Her face goes dark, and she snatches up her sword. She unleashes her dark aura instantly, smashing a massive crater into the ground, surrounded by swirling dark magic. She calls Christian a bastard and vows to drop him in literally 1 second. Sensing she is going full tryhard mode, Christian calls her out. He asks if she's really going all out on him and proposes a fair fade dark energy capped at 1 star and absolutely no magic spells. Oh, and for weapons, they are switching to wooden training swords. Melon actually laughs at the handicap. She flicks her blade, announcing she'll snap both his legs like twigs, using just half that power. Christian glances down at his limbs and claps back if he's putting his ability to walk on the line. What is she bringing to the table? She launches herself at him, screaming that any bet is fine, because he is not walking out of here. She swings for the fences, but Christian manages to intercept the blow again. It is heavy, though he has to muscle through just to shove her blade away from him. The knights are glued to the action. They can't believe Christian is actually going toe-to-toe with the deputy commander. It defies all logic. One knight whispers a theory. Maybe he is surviving because Melon's main weapon is usually a heavy greatsword, not this light practice gear. Melon is getting heated because none of her strikes are connecting. She is convinced he is a total scrub trying to gaslight herself into believing he is no match for her. She flashes back to his fights with Thurn and Torin. It is the exact same pattern playing out again. Sensing her panic, Christian hits her with a smirk, saying it looks like things aren't going according to plan. That snaps her patience. She tightens her grip and lunges for the kill, but Christian spots the opening. And without hesitating, bam, he delivers a savage headbutt right to her face. Melon stumbles, losing her stance, clutching her nose in total shock. She stares down at the blood dripping from her face. Christian glares at her, barely believing that Gambit actually paid off. He knew Melon was a spell sword. With her magic nerfed, her physical defense is full of holes. If her guard slipped, she couldn't patch it up. With raw strength alone, he figured if Melon was a pure sword maniac, that trick would have failed miserably. Melon stares at her own blood, then suddenly busts out laughing. She admits she never saw a headbutt coming. She apologizes for sleeping on his skills, and promises to lock in now. But Christian looks confused, and tells her the fight is already over. During the headbutt, he grazed her with his fingernail. If that nail had been tipped with poison, she would be a corpse right now. Realizing the truth, Melon shoulders her sword, accepts the loss, and asks him to name his price. But she throws in a condition: she wants a run back, one more opportunity to fight him. Seeing an angle, Christian agrees to the rematch, but only if she honors a second request from him. She agrees. So, Christian steps close and drops his voice, asking if she will kneel before him. Melon recoils, arguing that is impossible. Her loyalty belongs strictly to the main family of the Dark Magic clan. Christian nods, acknowledging she is just visiting from the main family. However, he says the issue will fix itself once he takes the throne as the young lord of the clan. Melon looks at him like he is insane, calling that pure delusion. Every single recognized young lord comes from the direct bloodline of the main family. Christian just smirks. He reminds her there is no rule explicitly banning a branch family member from becoming a master. Anyway, he accepts the duel for 1 month from now. He needs training time, but he sets the terms next time they keep the same power limits. Melon gets cocky, telling him he has zero chance of winning under those rules again. But Christian stands his ground, declaring that very few things in this world are truly impossible, leaving Melon with absolutely nothing to say. Hand on his heart, he gives a respectful bow. He agrees to see her in a month, making a silent vow to himself. When duel day arrives, he's going to teach her a harsh lesson about exactly where her loyalty belongs. Christian wastes zero time. He marches straight to his father and slaps down the recommendation letter. Melon wrote, "The review is brutal. She claims his fundamentals are trash and they need to grind way harder on his training." The count locks in, reading every word with intense focus. But Melon pulled a fast one in that note. She revealed that Christian is actually a prodigy, noting how he easily crushed skilled fighters despite his low rank. The old man goes dead silent. The weight of those words hits him and he can't help but see his son in a completely new light. Christian catches the stare and plays innocent, asking if his face is dirty, but the count waves it off. True to his word, he hands over the key to the family library. Christian keeps his face stone cold, but inside he's celebrating. He didn't just snag the key, he managed to completely flip Melon's perspective. And that's huge. Melon isn't just anyone, she's a demon from the main dark magic bloodline. Back in the Age of Destruction, she was a terrifying 6-star high fiend. Christian knows that if he wants to dominate the Dark Magic clan, he needs a heavy hitter like her on his squad. She isn't fully convinced yet, but he's betting 1 month is all he needs to win her over. As for Count Khazar, Christian clocked that expression earlier. He wonders if that was actually fatherly pride he saw, guessing that even demons have soft spots for family. He genuinely hopes the Count steps up to be a better dad than he was in the past life. Vowing not to let the old man down, Christian heads for the archives. Inside, he scans the shelves, taking in the forbidden buffet of knowledge. Blood arts, summoning rituals, curses, all the dark stuff the Dominion of Light would burn you for reading. He grabs a tome and slides it out, but freezes when he sees a pair of eyes staring back through the gap. Spooked, he jumps back, heart racing, only to realize it's just Marie. He demands to know why she's lurking, and she explains that she used to run this library. That surprises him, but the surprise turns to creeped-out dread. When she asks if he wants to monopolize her as his personal servant, he shuts that down immediately, yelling at her to be quiet. Marie notices the grimoire in his hand. She warns him that he's holding the binding seal, a 4-star dark art that's way above his pay grade to understand. Christian slams the book shut. He flexes his ego, reminding her that he's a literal genius, so it's fine. Marie switches to perfect maid mode, trying to hype him up, but he can tell she's just forcing the compliments. Curious, she asks why he picked that specific spell. Obviously, he has a motive. Christian is going rat hunting. Later during his cardio run with the Knights, Christian lets his mind drift to the traitors in his circle. Suspect number 1 is Thurn, because nobody hates Christian's guts more than that guy. Suspect 2 is Cox. He might not be blood related to the clan, but the guy has total access to the punishment cave. Plus, fiends always chase power over status, and Cox has been glazing Christian way too hard lately. It's suspicious behavior. But he considers a third option, a mystery player he hasn't even spotted yet. Whoever it is, they want him destroyed. That dreamstone trap in the cave proved it. That gives him a wicked idea. He decides to play the villain they want him to be, and whoever smirks at his downfall is the culprit. He kicks off the performance immediately, screaming that the training is too hard and quitting on the spot. The other knights are left standing there, totally confused. Back at the mansion, the Count yells at him while Christian acts like a total brat, complaining that the staff served him garbage food, justifying why he smashed the plate. He screams at the servants to remake it, leaving the Count feeling like an idiot for thinking his son had actually matured. Heartbroken by the disappointment, the father walks out of the dining room. Christian feels a pang of guilt, but he knows this is the only way to save the family. Hoping his dad eventually understands, Christian fully commits to the bit spreading rumors that the old toxic Christian is back. He harasses the maids, cleaning the halls, and burns money like it's nothing. He caps it off by demanding wine from Marie, then screaming in her face when she tries to cut him off. Marie played the saint, acting like he was sipping on hard liquor. Christian, however, saw right through the charade. He called her out on the non-alcoholic switch. Marie immediately gasped, staging an Oscar-worthy scene about the booze magically vanishing because minors are forbidden from drinking. Christian tried to hold on to his trash-tier noble persona, sneering that rules shouldn't matter, since he was a good-for-nothing scumbag anyway. Marie tilted her head, asking if he had decided to enter his villain era again before assuring him that it didn't matter. She vowed she would remain his loyal servant forever. Totally creeped out by her intensity, Christian dropped the act. "I'm catching a rat," he confessed, flashing his newly mastered binding seal. Marie's jaw hit the floor. Christian smirked, reminding her he wasn't lying about being a prodigy. He had modified a high-tier spell to work with zero effort, even at a low star level. He let her know he hadn't just been goofing around. He'd been grinding, mastering spell after spell. Looking at him now, Marie actually started to wonder if he was built different. Suddenly the door slammed open. Thurn stormed in, looking ready to kill. Christian spotted his little brother and flipped the switch instantly, slurring his words, stumbling the full drunk loser routine. He asked what the kid was doing there. With murder in his eyes, Thurn asked if this was rock bottom, admitting he actually foolishly thought his brother had changed. Christian internally smirked. Thurn's rage was genuine, pure disappointment. That meant Thurn wasn't the traitor. Suspect cleared. Christian decided to bring him into the fold. He leaned in, whispering that there was a rat in the mansion. Thurn froze, completely blindsided by the confession. Christian explained that someone under this roof wanted to see him burn, and he was planning to give them a front row seat. Thurn hesitated, wondering if this was another lie. To prove it, Christian shoved the glass under his nose. It was fake, just grape juice. Thurn's eyes widened, realizing the truth. "Who is it?" he demanded. Christian swirled the fake wine, eyes cold. "Hard to say," yet he murmured. "But the trap is set. They're about to take the bait." Crash. He let the glass shatter against the floor. At the sound of breaking glass, a servant rushed in, panic written all over his face. Christian roared back in character, screaming that this swill wasn't what he ordered. "Get Cox in here," now he commanded. The servant stammered an apology, explaining that the butler was busy. Perfect. That gave Christian the exact excuse he needed to pay Cox a little visit. As Christian licked the splash of wine off his hand, Thurn watched in awe. The acting was terrifyingly realistic. Christian marched straight to the butler's office and slammed a wine bottle onto the desk. Bang. Cox jumped, looking up from his chair in shock, asking what was going on. Christian didn't say a word. He just uncorked the bottle and dumped the entire thing over Cox's head. The butler sat there, drenched and silent, while Christian informed him that this wasn't the vintage he asked for. "You looking down on me?" he sneered. Cox scrambled to defend himself. He stood up, dripping wet, denying the accusation and offering to fetch the right bottle immediately. Christian cut him off. He wanted Cox personally to get it. Cox clenched his fists, veins popping, arguing that he was swamped with work. Christian didn't care. "I need to change my clothes anyway," he said dismissively. "Bring it to my room on your way," he ordered, tapping Cox's cheek like a pet. Grinding his teeth, Cox promised to be there soon. As he walked out, Christian mentally applauded the guy's patience. He took the humiliation, but that killing intent, unmistakable. But his focus shifted when he spotted the wet documents left on Cox's desk. He snatched them up. It confirmed everything. He had the rat. Christian knew the guy was messing with the finances, and the papers proved it. But embezzlement wasn't enough. He needed a smoking gun to bury him. He tossed the documents back, just as Cox returned with the wine. "You mad at me, Cox?" Christian teased. "Of course not," Master Cox lied through his teeth. Satisfied with the power play, Christian patted him on the shoulder, calling him his favorite. That's when Cox dropped the hook. He had a message. Christian's friends wanted to meet him secretly at the usual spot. Christian paused. "What friends?" He played it cool, giving a confused look. Cox leaned in, whispering with fake concern, suggesting that, while he shouldn't judge, maybe Christian shouldn't be hanging around that crowd. A setup. Christian smiled internally. "I'll go," he agreed. This was playing out even better than he expected. Cut to the hideout. Christian sat there, bored out of his mind. Sitting cross-legged, he listened to these so-called friends yap about how he'd changed but was still their top dog. Christian ignored them, his eyes locking on a girl trembling as she poured their drinks. Yeah, these guys weren't friends, they were absolute trash. Who hires a kid for a sketchy gig like this? One of the guys shoves a drink in Christian's face, nagging him to chug it, but the vibes are completely off. Christian snaps, smashing the glass right into his so-called friend's mug. As the guy recoils, Christian calls it out. They spiked the sacred booze. He could tell by their twitchy reactions. These snakes knew exactly what was in that cup. Panic sets in, but Christian moves faster. He casts a spell instantly, knocking the little girl out cold before she sees the violence. The traitors gasp, terrified that he knows dark arts. Christian, totally over their nonsense, stomps a boot onto the table, silencing their shock. Not the time to be impressed, he snarls. He grabs both their heads, and crunch, slams them face first into the wood. Chill out, one pleads. Christian whips out a blade, his eyes cold as ice. If that beatdown didn't clue you in, you can just die right here. After leaving them tied up and bruised, the goons finally spill the tea. They were ordered to drug Christian, murder the girl, and frame him for the crime. Their supplier had blackmailed them with their own secret stash, so they claimed they had zero choice. Christian cuts to the chase. Who pulled the strings? When they clam up, Christian drives the knife into the floorboards, inches from the guy's crotch. Talk or lose it. Terrified for his manhood, the friend squeals it was Cox. They beg for mercy, promising loyalty. Christian makes them repeat the pledge twice, locking it in. He flares his aura. Listen up. You're going to do exactly what I say. While the goons drop to the floor defeated, Cox bursts into the Count's office, sweating bullets. Emergency, he yells. The young master just committed murder. The Count bolts upright, horrified. Cox spins the lie Christian got wasted last night, killed the serving girl and dumped her body in the river. Cox creates a panic, insisting this scandal could ruin them. The Count looks paralyzed for a second, then hardens his gaze. Drag Christian to the fiend court. With a grim face, he invokes his right to an immediate trial. Cox turns away, hiding a wicked smirk. Fast forward to the courtroom. Christian stands tall, claiming innocence. The Count mentions witnesses, but Christian scoffs. How? There's no crime. As the crowd whispers in confusion, Christian announces, major misunderstanding here. Right on cue, the courtroom doors creak open. It's the dead girl walking in alive. Christian grins. Is this the corpse? The entire room, including the traitors, freezes in shock. The girl speaks up. Christian saved me. I passed out, he took me home and even paid my rent. She points an accusing finger. Those friends are the villains. They spiked his drink. The drama hits its peak. Christian activates his magic, forcing the bruised friends to vomit the truth. The murder report was a hoax. And Butler Cox ordered the frame job. Cox loses it, screaming. Lies. They're lying. He tries to gaslight the court, claiming he's the victim here. He glares at Christian. This prank is over, but Christian saw this coming a mile away. He turns to the Count. As the victim of this setup, I have one demand. Let me act as your proxy. I want to cross-examine Butler Cox myself. The Count sees the fire in Christian's eyes. Fine. But one wrong move and you're done, he warns, ordering Cox to the defendant's stand. Christian steps up, radiating authority. As representative of the Magic Empire, His Majesty, the Demon Emperor, and the Dark Magic Clan, ruling the Eastern region. And as the voice of Count Khazar, he begins the interrogation. Do you swear to speak only the truth? Cox agrees. Christian pushes. Are you sure? Cox says yes again. Snap. Christian triggers the binding seal, just like he did with the goons. The court gasps a kid. Using 4-star dark magic, Christian had hacked the spell, making it work at a lower level by forcing the target to swear twice. Cox walked right into the trap. Christian tightens the magical noose. Why did you hire them? To destroy my reputation. Bound by the spell, Cox chokes out the truth I was ordered to. The man knew my dirty secret. He threatened to expose me if I didn't ruin you. Christian smirks. By dirty secret, you mean the embezzlement. The interrogation had been brutal, dragging on until Christian finally demanded the name of the puppet master. After enduring waves of agony and dark magic, Cox finally broke, confessing that the strings were being pulled by Baron Eshid, the second son of the Dark Magic Clan. Realizing he had just signed his own death warrant with that truth, Cox scrambled to escape, but he was too slow. Swoosh! Christian's blade flashed, severing Cox's head in one clean strike. As the onlookers froze in horror, Christian declared that he had executed the traitor right then and there, invoking the authority vested in him by the Count. The Count, witnessing the sudden bloodbath, marched up to Christian, demanding an explanation for the execution. Christian didn't flinch, explaining that leaving Cox alive would have given the main family a chance to fabricate evidence and bury the entire incident. They couldn't afford to be soft. Christian wanted to burn the truth into everyone's memory right this second. Eshed had tried to take him out. Stunned by his son's ruthlessness, the Count signaled for Christian to follow him, and with a surge of magic, he warped them instantly to a secluded secret training ground. Away from the prying eyes of the court, the Count got straight to business, asking if Christian really believed Eshed would escalate the conflict over the succession war. When Christian nodded, the Count laid out the harsh reality. A family's survival and influence depended entirely on backing the winning horse, the right successor. And while he admitted Christian made the right call back there, he was terrified his son was moving too fast, too recklessly. As it stood, their best bet was aligning with the first young lady. The first young lord was out of the question, mainly because the guy was a bloodthirsty psychopath. But Christian cut him off with a third option: he would take the throne himself. The Count froze, then waved his arm dismissively. It was insane. Someone from a branch family. could only dream of becoming the successor if they possessed God-tier ability. Christian countered that the rule was just ink on paper, never actually enforced. He then turned the tables, asking why his father thought Eshed targeted him. The Count sighed, admitting that while Christian was a total prodigy as a child, he had fallen far behind Eshed over the years. But Christian wasn't sweating it. He was confident he would close that power gap in no time. But for this plan to work, he needed his old man's help. He needed a formal recommendation to enter the sacred dark rite, which was kicking off in 2 months. The Count hesitated, warning him that the tournament required a minimum rank of 2-star level. Christian was currently stuck at 1 star. Unfazed, he looked his father in the eye and promised to hit 2-star rank before the deadline. Crossing his arms with a confident grin, he asked his father to trust him. Soon, word spread like wildfire that Christian was a changed man and that the Count was personally putting him through a training regimen so brutal, even veteran knights couldn't stomach it. Cut to the training grounds, the Count was floored. He had only just introduced the blackside swordsmanship technique, and Christian had already mastered the basics. While the Count stood there processing the shock, Christian questioned the traditional method. Why keep the moves separate? The textbook said, to bind with mud swordsmanship, and then strike with blackside. But Christian saw a flaw in the logic. He felt there was a cheat code to this. Using his own modified technique, he sliced through the wooden dummies like butter. The Count's eyes nearly popped out of his head. Christian explained that against these humanoid wooden limbs, standard deflection was useless. So he fused the mud swordsmanship inside the blackside sword energy. The Count was baffled. A mere 1 star pulling off a fusion technique, it shouldn't be possible. He tried to rationalize it, sure it was powerful, but dual casting usually made throwing curses impossible. Christian shrugged. For him, it was child's play, barely even an inconvenience. The Count was left speechless. Fast forward 15 days, Christian was sprawled on the dirt, gasping for air after a marathon run. Knowing he couldn't slack off, stamina was the absolute key to breaking through his power limits. Suddenly, Melon shadowed over him, teasing him about being tired and reminding him their duel was right around the corner. Christian looked up, feeling the heavy aura she always projected, and assured her that he was grinding to make it worth her time. She smirked, acknowledging his insane growth speed, but reminded him he was still just a 1 star. If he disappointed her, she'd never submit to him. Christian pushed himself off the ground, meeting her gaze. He knew the stakes. If he failed, but he wouldn't. He knew for a fact that duel wasn't a total wash. He definitely leveled up his experience. Meanwhile, Melon sashayed away, cackling about his boundless stamina, practically daring him to break his limits just to keep her entertained. Christian watched her go, calculating the power gap. Melon was an upper 4-star beast. In this world, a single stage was split into 3 massive tiers: lower, middle, and upper. Christian was barely sitting at upper 1 star. He was basically a novice compared to her god-tier status. But the guy had a cheat code. He was filthy rich. A true wallet warrior. A sinister pay-to-win smirk crept onto his face, sending a chill down the spines of the nearby knights. He marched into his room and asked Marie if his gear was packed for the trip, but instead of a straight answer, he found Marie floating on cloud 9, convinced this was their first romantic date. She had decked herself out to look like a runway model. Christian recoiled from her blinding enthusiasm and snapped that he never actually invited her. But Marie, being the queen of delusion, interpreted his rejection as deep concern for her health. She reassured him not to stress, claiming serving him was her life's greatest joy. It triggered a flashback to a chat with his dad. Christian had begged to swap his attendant for a human, but his father dropped the bomb. Impossible. Turns out, the old Christian locked in a soul-binding master-servant contract with her. High-ranking banshees don't obey without one. The news had floored him. Panic set in as he demanded to know how to void the deal, and his dad casually mentioned he'd need to form a physically intimate bond with Marie to break it. That memory made Christian want to rip his hair out and curse his past self's stupidity. Back in reality, he ordered Marie to stay put, explaining he was heading into a crowd. Marie's face fell, her eyes turning into sad saucers as she admitted she wanted to tag along, sending Christian into a scramble for a better excuse. He stammered that her spiritual aura might accidentally nuke the civilians. Marie hit him with the ultimate guilt trip, teary puppy eyes, whimpering that she'd been trapped in the mansion for decades. Cornered and guilt-ridden, he finally caved. She could come, but there was one non-negotiable rule. Total stealth mode, no one sees her. She beamed, praising his benevolence, while he just grunted for her to keep up. Curiosity piqued, she asked about the destination. Christian's reply: a place where he was going to make bank. Marie, looking confused, lifted her skirt, and suddenly an avalanche of gold coins poured out. She pointed out he was already loaded. Christian's jaw hit the floor as he screamed at her to stash the cash back inside. Marie wasn't letting it go, firing off questions. Exhausted Christian hinted the money was for a hobby, from his past life. But the moment he stepped out the gates, Thurn was there scowling and barking about him being late. Stunned to see his brother, Christian asked what the hell he was doing there. Thurn dryly replied he was on babysitting duty, just in case Christian decided to act like a degenerate again. Christian laughed it off, joking that he was only heading out to gamble away the entire family fortune. Seeing Thurn's horrified expression, Christian reminded him they were fiends, booze, and betting were practically in their DNA. Heck, even the Demon Emperor endorsed gambling. There was a reason the vice was legal. Thurn, however, wasn't buying the sales pitch and insisted on shadowing him. Christian leaned in with a teasing grin, asking if his little brother was actually worried about him. That triggered Thurn, who snapped back that he didn't give a damn about Christian. Only the family reputation he was bound to drag through the mud. Still, Christian let him tag along, warning that the place might be too intense for a straight-laced nerd. When Thurn scoffed that gambling was just card games, Christian promised to crush that arrogance and flatten his ego. Upon arrival, Thurn stood there gaping at the massive casino, unable to process that a building could be this flashy. Christian told him to stop looking like a country bumpkin and tossed him a mask, explaining that anonymity was the only ticket inside. He then signaled Marie to go invisible and pulled her close to whisper a secret strategy. She nodded, executing the order immediately, while the brothers secured their masks. Thurn pressed for the game plan, but Christian brushed him off, telling him to chill because they were already behind schedule. As they strutted inside, the crowd turned to stare, whispers rippling through the room about the two fresh marks who looked like born and bred suckers. One gambler sneered, mocking the idiots walking straight into the lion's den without a clue. Ignoring the heat, Christian turned to Thurn and laid down a bet on who could rake in the most cash in 1 hour. If Thurn won, Christian would call him Big Brother for a month. But if Thurn lost, he'd be answering to Christian. Thurn, totally clueless at first, suddenly puffed out his chest, ready to throw down on the bet. Christian snatched the coin bag, taunting, "You scared?" But Thurn scoffed, walking off with a, "Watch me go first." Chris slid into a seat while some random hype man nearby immediately declared it a win for him, buttering him up, saying he had natural talent and could make a killing if he kept playing. But Chris knew the score. This casino was a trap. Feed the fish, a little bait, let them get arrogant, then gut them the second they drop big money. Chris. He'd seen this hustle 100 times. He could smell the scam a mile away. But his little brother Thurn, zero clue. He walked face first into the buzzsaw. Chris knew it was game over. Seeing Thurn caught tighter than a fish in a gill net, he leaned in, faking concern. "Pack it up, bro. Go to sleep." Thurn got defensive, acting like they were in the same sinking boat. Chris shut that down fast. "I only lost 500 rupees. Thurn snapped back. "Well, I'm only down 1,000. The whole table erupted in laughter at the cell phone. Chris saw the wolves circling. Thurn was fresh meat and the gambling sharks were ready to feast. "You done?" Chris asked. Thurn just snatched the cash straight from Chris's grip. Chris flashed a grin and shrugged. He played the concerned brother, but secretly he needed Thurn to crash and burn, because Thurn was just bait for the real plan. As the night dragged, Thurn was sweating bullets, oblivious to the eyes tracking his every twitch. Chris clocked every trick, the hand signals, the shuffles, and realized this setup was too perfect. Suddenly, Marie materialized behind him like a shadow, whispering she'd located the targets. "Crushed it," Chris murmured. Meanwhile, Thurn was spiraling, totally broken by the losing streak, while Chris and Marie shared a dark chuckle. Moments later, Marie led him to a secluded door, signaling, "This is it." Chris nodded. "Kick it open." The second they breached the room, panic erupted among the suits inside. "Who are you?" Chris ripped off his mask, flashing a cold smirk, suggesting if they had a brain they'd know his face. The temperature in the room dropped to sub-zero. "Get the boss." One lackey's attitude flipped instantly, bowing so low his nose scraped the floor, terrified that the infamous Chris was actually here. Enter Grant, the big shot running the Grant Merchant Guild. Grant wore his merchant smile like a mask, but everyone knew the dirty truth: he ran this gambling den too. "Private chat," Chris demanded. Grant tried to play innocent, asking why, but Chris cut right to the chase. He exposed the scam on his little brother instantly, then dared to ask Grant why he was even here. Grant choked. "That loser in the tiger mask is your brother." Chris didn't blink, dropping the bomb that Thurn was the true heir of Count Raiden Khazar. The color drained from Grant's face. "I just run the place. I didn't cheat him," he pleaded. Marie decided to turn up the heat, shooting him a glare that screamed death. Grant collapsed, begging for his life, swearing if he knew the kid was with the Count, he never would have touched him. Chris raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Prove it." Grant scrambled. "Money. How much do you want?" 1,000,000 rupees, Chris deadpanned. Grant looked ready to faint, but Chris decided to show mercy, settling for 200,000 instead. Grant nearly wept with relief, but Chris held up a finger. He wanted one more thing, keeping it mysterious. Later, Chris was grinning ear to ear, inspecting the high-tier gear bought with the payout. Marie whistled, impressed. She hadn't expected him to dump the cash into upgrades so fast. And dubbed it A. Chris dug Marie's vibe, but let's be real, his eyes were glued to the wicked shimmer of his new steel. Marie cocked an eyebrow. That blade screamed déjà vu until it clicked. This was Gruna. The legendary holy sword wielded by a hero who literally traded his soul just to grip the hilt. Every demon in the zip code craved it, yet here it sat in Chris's palms, looking like a rusty piece of junk. Chris just smirked, calling it all part of the master plan before shoving a necklace at her chest. He'd caught her eyeing it earlier. "Keep it," he said casually. Marie's jaw practically unhinged. Chris explained she'd be stuck in a loop of regret without it. "Consider it a ticket to moving on. Don't make it weird," he warned. Stunned, Marie confessed she'd never received a single gift, alive or dead. She screamed a thank you that nearly made Chris gag on air. He shooed her off, but she beamed a 1,000-watt smile back, swearing to repay him with premium blood juice. Chris facepalmed, begging her to drop the creepy vampire aesthetic. Then Marie dropped the bomb, that strawberry drink he'd been chugging. 100% blood. Chris turned a lovely shade of pale. Suddenly Chris froze. Something niggled at his brain. He'd definitely forgotten something massive, but meh, whatever. It would come to him. Smash, cut to the next morning. Thurn kicked the door down, absolutely foaming at the mouth. Chris blinked open one eye. Oh, right, that. Thurn was screaming bloody murder about getting abandoned at the casino. Apparently he was seconds away from being sold as a debt slave. Chris shrugged. Grant probably bailed the kid out anyway. But a bet is a bet. Thurn lost, and now it was time to pay the piper, or in this case, show some respect. Thurn looked like his soul left his body, strangling a pillow until feathers exploded. Finally, he choked out the word esteemed. He couldn't finish. Then he just snapped, screaming, "Esteemed King, Emperor, Majesty, Brother." It was music to Chris's ears. He soaked it up, telling Thurn to remember who his boss. "Get good, kid," Chris teased. Thurn vowed vengeance to the heavens. Chris laughed it off. Crazy to think this pipsqueak might actually be the one to end him someday. After all, the kid is the illegitimate son of Eshid, scion of Viscount Langham and the future apex predator of the Young Lords. Chris didn't really have a grudge. He wasn't the original Christian anyway. But to climb the ladder, he would have to crush the competition himself. Step 1, recruit Melon. Step 2, master the holy sword. Deep in the training dungeon, Chris loomed over the blade, contemplating the body count of those who tried to wield Gruna. Now it was just a cursed paperweight, untamable and broken. But would it yield to him? The second he gripped the chains, the steel erupted in holy fire, blasting his hand back. Chris just grinned. Expected behavior. It was programmed to repel dark energy, but underneath the magic, it is just a tool. Crack the firewall and the admin rights were his. Chris started smashing away, eating voltage with every strike. Hammers shattered like glass, but he didn't stop daring the stubborn artifact to submit. Later in the family's sanctuary, Raiden's voice cut through the silence. "You ready?" Chris nodded. A woman stood there, radiating power. It clicked instantly. Marion Barron, the Knight Commander herself. Leader of the Black Shadows, his aunt and Raiden's terrifying big sister. The Duke's personal shield. She handled the wet work, assassinations, intel, the dirty laundry. So why was she crashing this party? Raiden explained Aunt Marion dropped by to discuss the Cox incident. Marion chuckled, praising Cox's audacity. But Chris sensed the Duke just wanted to verify Esh was still breathing. Keeping the golden boy out of the crossfire was priority number 1. Chris muttered that the Duke had way too much free time. Bold words, Marion noted. Then she clarified the Duke couldn't care less about playground squabbles. His eyes were on Chris. That made the protagonist pause. Was this his chance to farm some influence points? Marion shook her head, debating if her nephew was fearless or brain-dead. He wasn't even 2-star rank yet, but he wanted to throw hands with Melon. She advised him to abort the mission. Chris appreciated the concern, but flashed a wicked grin and his new blade. Marion's eyes widened. She clocked it instantly. If that was Gruna, Chris wasn't just bold. He was clinically insane. This took the cake. She turned to Raiden, finally using his first name, mocking his relentless bragging. "You said he changed," she teased. Raiden stood tall, dead serious, and bursting with fatherly pride. The blade pulsed with a faint golden glow. No explosions, no backlash, nothing. Confused, she side-eyed the weapon, asking if this thing was just a cheap knockoff. Chris chucked the hilt her way, telling her to find out the hard way. The second Marion's skin made contact, angry sparks erupted, nearly forcing her to drop it. She shot him a death glare, demanding an explanation for how he wasn't getting fried. Chris flashed a cocky grin trade secret. All she needed to understand was that he could pull off what the rest of them couldn't simply because he was built different. A total genius. Raiden looked ready to explode from sheer dad pride. Suddenly, Melon burst onto the scene, cackling like a maniac, claiming Chris was a walking bag of surprises. She teased that taming a holy sword was a neat party trick, but it wouldn't save him. He'd be dead meat before the sun went down. Chris didn't even blink. The duel kicked off instantly. Melon launched herself like a human missile, bringing her blade down in a heavy arc. Chris caught the strike, realizing her stats had skyrocketed. Her speed and strength were insane, and there was zero chance he could match her physically in a fair fight. Melon pushed the offensive, but when Chris blocked the second hit, his holy sword flared up, literally chewing through the dark energy coating her weapon. Raiden and Marion watched in awe, realizing the holy blade wasn't just blocking, it was actively repelling the darkness. Raiden puffed up, bragging that Chris was already leagues ahead of where Marion was at his age. But Marion cut in, it wasn't over. Chris was still gripping that holy relic. They focused in, and saw his hand glowing with ominous purple light, fighting for dominance against the sword's holy aura. Chris launched a counter, forcing Melon on the defensive. Raiden noted the raw power output, worrying that Chris's dark aura looked shaky and unstable. But Marion saw what was really happening. He wasn't losing control. He was micromanaging his dark energy, keeping it perfectly steady for split seconds, so the sword wouldn't reject him. Melon hopped back to reset, and Chris smirked, asking if she was having fun yet. Melon admitted she was having a blast, but asked if he was straight up reading her mind. Chris nodded. He wasn't psychic, just hyper-observant. Every attack starts with the body. Even the pros have to tense muscles and shift weight before they can swing, so Chris was just reading her shoulders for the telegraph. Melon's grin widened. She told him that little trick wouldn't be enough to save him. Abruptly, a toxic green aura erupted from her hands, snaking out to bind Chris in place. She reminded him that Black Swamp Knights were expert spell swords. Chris responded with a violent shockwave of holy energy blasting the bindings away. He admitted that one actually almost caught him slipping. She demanded to know if he was packing a purification artifact. Chris nodded toward Raiden, shouting out that he only survived thanks to his pops. Raiden looked confused that gear was supposed to be locked in the family vault. Chris shrugged. He confessed to having slightly sticky fingers. Besides, having top-tier gear is half the battle. Reaching into his pocket, Chris chucked an object at Melon that detonated the instant it touched her. She scrambled to dodge, but Chris called out that running was futile. He immediately tossed another artifact into the mix. Direct hit. The effect triggered perfectly. Chris mentioned he bought these toys with the cash he swindled from grant money well spent. He called Melon out, telling her to quit hiding because he knew she wasn't done yet. She lunged from the smoke, her blade aiming straight for his vitals. Chris pivoted, meeting her attack, tip to tip. The impact was devastating. Her weapon cracked instantly before shattering into 1,000 pieces. Raiden put the pieces together. He realized Chris had tossed a corrosion marble into the air earlier to weaken her steel. Exactly the kind of strategic play he expected from his prodigy son. Melon walked toward Chris, grinning like a lunatic and laughing, claiming that fight was an absolute rush. She asked what other dirty tricks he had up his sleeve. Marion, however, was panicking, screaming that Melon had snapped, and they needed to stop the fight. But Chris stayed ice cold. He swayed away from her desperate attack before flicking his blade upward, teleporting behind Melon in a blur. With cold steel pressed against her throat, she froze, genuinely shocked. Chris whispered that it was checkmate. He asked if she was satisfied, pressing just hard enough to draw a drop of blood on her cheek. Raiden was beaming. The guy was absolutely over the moon. Melon burst into laughter, admitting her adrenaline was still spiking after a scrap like that. Chris brought up their deal, but said he'd respect her decision if she wanted to bail. Forced loyalty is trash anyway. She asked if rolling with his crew meant more insane fights like this in the future. Chris squeezed her hand, promising they could throw hands whenever she wanted. Later, bathed in the glow of the sunset, Marion stood watching, reflecting that Chris's method of handling dark energy was truly unique. She recalled how even the Duke had discarded the holy sword in frustration. She asked if it was truly impossible for someone like him to wield it. The Duke had explained he could only hold it for seconds because dark energy frequencies constantly shifted, requiring constant micro-adjustments to stop the sword from rejecting you. But that level of control was impossible, unless you were a high-ranking demon, a dragon, or just an absolute freak of nature who controlled dark power, as naturally as breathing air. Marion thought back to Chris's smirk after the duel, wondering if he'd finally done enough to earn her respect. She couldn't hide her smile, admitting that maybe, just maybe, her father's lifelong dream was finally within reach thanks to Chris. Cut to the kitchen, a terrifying, menacing figure was going to town with a knife. He took a strawberry and placed it on a cheesecake. With such delicate precision, you'd think he was a fine artist, not a culinary beast. Chris was flabbergasted. This terrifying guy was the legendary pastry chef. Marie explained that even though the orc looked like a total villain, his skills in the kitchen were god tier. The head orc chef demanded to know why Chris was invading his territory, and Chris didn't flinch. He was there to bake cookies. Marie immediately got up in his grill. Why cookies? She pressed. When Chris admitted they were a gift, she went full drama queen, demanding to know if he was simping for some other girl. Chris shut that narrative down fast. No romance involved, though, yeah, the recipient was female. The head chef offered to take over the oven, but Chris wasn't having it. These had to be handmade. The magic ingredient was the effort itself, and he wasn't outsourcing that kind of sincerity. Before he could explain further, the kitchen crew decided basic baking was too boring. They went absolute goblin mode, pulverizing strawberries into a violent jam session, sending crimson splatter everywhere. Chris took a direct hit of goop to the cheek, staring blankly at the strawberry massacre unfolding around him. He deadpanned at Marie, asking if she was 100% positive they weren't spiking that juice with actual blood. Marie just let out that signature maniacal cackle. Later that evening, Chris caught sight of Marion prepping her mount silhouetted against the twilight. He hollered out, rushing over. He'd heard she was bouncing and couldn't let her leave without a proper send-off. She thanked him, eyes concerned that he might still be gassed from the duel. Chris brushed it off, flexing his stamina before revealing the payload, the cookies. Marion actually blushed, looking shook that he'd put in that much effort. Chris shrugged it off. He was just hyped to reconnect with his aunt and simply wanted to do something extra. His mind flashed back to yesterday, grilling his dad for intel on exactly what kind of flavors Marion vibed with. Raiden had roasted him, claiming Chris had zero game when it came to winning over women. Back in the present, Chris urged Marion to take the taste test, emphasizing the handmade part. Marion was skeptical. She took a tiny nibble, and the flavor absolutely slapped. She looked at him wide-eyed. These were legit delicious. Seeing Chris beam with genuine pride, Marion decided this level of service needed a reward. Name your price, she offered. Chris didn't hesitate for a second. He asked her to step up and be his true aunt from here on out. Marion chuckled immediately, sensing layers to that request. She clocked it immediately. He wanted backup for the succession wars. With a heavy sigh, she broke it down. Adults from the main house had to stay neutral. No taking sides. It was the law of the land. But Chris looked her dead in the eye. He just wanted a closer connection with his blood relative. Pure and simple. Then he dropped a smirk. Of course, if she felt like spoiling him with some secret assist on the side, who was he to refuse? Marion laughed, grabbing another cookie. She said she vibed with his honesty. A nephew with baking skills like that, impossible to hate. Chris promised to keep the supply chain running. With one condition, she couldn't make him sad, or it might ruin the flavor profile. So she'd better stay on his good side. Marion just smiled, then pivoted. Had he ever thought about enlisting with the Black Shadow Knights? Chris tried to deflect, but she cut right through his excuses. She told him his performance against Melon was electric. He had the potential to eclipse even the Duke one day. But the competition, they weren't lightweights. Her fear was that he'd burn out before he peaked. Chris's answer was cold. He'd rather die climbing the mountain than live without ever trying. Marion looked stunned by the intensity, but Chris thanked her for the concern. In his mind, losing wasn't even an option on the table. For some reason, coming from him, it sounded like a fact. She vowed not to stand in his way, even if his path got reckless. She left him with one final warning: beware the first young lord. Chris frowned, confused why she'd flagged Julian, and not Escheld. Julian had a rep for being the softest, most gentle of the bunch. Marion just gave a cryptic smile, saying the realization would hit him soon enough. Chris nodded, locking that info away as she waved goodbye and galloped off. Chris stood, rooted to the spot, replaying the dialogue. That night, lying in bed, his brain was running a marathon. He analyzed his aunt and father. Both boasted 6-star rankings, yet they were barely footnotes in the Great War's history books. It made him wonder how many absolute monsters were hiding in the woodwork of the Empire. He guessed their faction had to be stacked with heavy hitters, maybe even outclassing the Dominion of Light. Chris swore to himself, no more failures. It was time to get strong fast. A whole month dissolved in the blink of an eye. One morning, Chris reported to his father's office. Raiden started to brief him on something major, then froze. He stared at Chris's aura. 2 stars. Already. Calling that kind of power leveling nuts was an understatement. Chris just shrugged. A promise is a promise. So his dad needed to chill with the shock. Chris cut to the chase. Why the private meeting at the crack of dawn? Raiden dropped the bomb. The main family had finally replied. He'd put both Chris and Thorn forward for the sacred dark rite, but only Thorn got the green light. Chris's expression crumbled as Raiden read the list of reasons. The excessive spending, the wild raves, the petty theft, the drunken brawls, and the trail of wrecked property. Basically, Chris's entire greatest hits album of bad decisions. Raiden couldn't even defend him because the receipts were undeniable. Chris let out a long sigh. Even legends have to pay the piper eventually, and he'd have to take the L on this one. But Raiden was fuming. He couldn't believe the main house would disrespect his son like this. Chris wondered if Viscount Langham was pulling strings, but his dad shook his head. The Viscount had been quiet ever since Eshield messed up. No, the call came from higher up. It was Lion D. Aaron calling the shots, a direct descendant and the MVP of the upcoming rite. Chris's eyes narrowed as he connected the dots. The sacred dark rite wasn't just a ceremony, it was a slaughterhouse. Candidates lined up to siphon pure abyssal energy straight from another dimension. But with the supply running critically low, the event spiraled into a cutthroat battle royale to see who could snatch the biggest slice of power. Your final ranking determined your energy intake, serving as the ultimate cheat code for claiming the title of Young Lord. Massive advantage in the race for the heir's seat. If Lion hogged the darkness, Chris's dream of becoming the 6th Young Lord was dead in the water. Raiden slammed a fist to his chest, swearing loyalty and even offering to drag Marion into the fray if things got hairy. Chris shut that down immediately. He was flying solo. Raiden acknowledged Chris's glow-up and newfound strength but insisted. He let the grown-ups handle the messy clan politics. Chris gave a polite nod, but the gears in his head were already grinding out a master plan. Chris asked if Count Tierman's brood would be crashing the right. Raiden grunted a yes. Count Roman's third brat was in the mix. Worse, the punk had allied with Lion trash-talking Chris as nothing but a cheap trickster who played with pets. Like he didn't even deserve a spot in the arena. Chris chuckled, realizing his dad was being a total helicopter parent, and told him to take a chill pill. He'd clap back with results when it mattered. Since the Tierman squad leading the Black Pill hunt was already throwing shade, Chris figured infiltrating as a lowly driver was the perfect stealth play. Deep in the shadowy heart of the estate, Marion was briefing the Duke. She confirmed she'd kept tabs on Christian, but the Duke wasn't buying it, recalling the boy as a fraud, a washed-up prodigy with an ego problem. Marion pushed back, insisting Chris had undergone a total transformation. The Duke paused, intrigued. He asked if she really thought Chris could achieve the ambition that drove the Duke to use forbidden arts just to stay alive. Marion couldn't guarantee a win, but she swore Chris was their best shot. That sparked the Duke's interest. Still, he scoffed that Chris probably wouldn't even survive the qualifiers for the Sacred Dark Rite, asking if the clan agreed. Marion confirmed the odds were trash. Would the Duke step in? Hard no. A true apex predator had to smash through barriers alone, not get carried. Marion argued that while Chris was young, he was a dormant beast who could go the distance. The Duke's glare intensified, practically laser beaming a warning through her skull. Don't cross me. Reading the room, Marion zipped her lips. The Duke claimed his harshness was a form of love for those with potential. Then he teased Marion, asking if she was covering for the kid because she had a soft spot for him. Ready to escalate, the Duke summoned Simon, the head butler. The guy glided in looking like he walked straight out of a horror movie casting call. Seriously, pure villain energy radiating off this dude. The Duke ordered him to shadow Chris until the right and spill every detail. Simon grinned, asking if he could pull a little prank while watching. Marion shot him a death glare, but the Duke just warned him not to break the toy. Simon cackled, exiting to brew some chaos. Marion just prayed Chris could survive the incoming storm. Cut to Chris rattling along in a carriage through a village. Hitting 2 stars this fast was pure freakish talent, but his stamina bar and mana pool were dangerously low. Hitting 3 stars right now was a pipe dream. To power level, he needed a black pill to inject some monster-grade darkness into his veins. Conveniently, the Tierman hunters running the operation were already beefing with him. Perfect timing. But simply jumping the Karage beast wouldn't drop the loot. The black pill didn't just spawn automatically. There was a hidden unlock condition Chris was keeping close to the vest. When the carriage halted, Lardis sprinted over, flashing a greasy smile and asking what brought the young master out. Chris skipped the pleasantries, guessing Lardis hadn't come empty-handed. Lardis tried the loyal servant act, offering a gift, but Chris slapped it to the dirt. Lardis's eyes nearly popped out. Chris revealed he knew all about the shady side hustles, tax evasion, gambling dens, and demanded it stop. He wouldn't tolerate dirty tricks from a low-tier minion. Chris offered a one-time pass, warning Lardis to clean up his act. Pivot time. Chris demanded a gray pill. Could Lardis make it happen? Lardis whined about inflation and rising prices. Chris caught the drift and signaled Marie. The switch flipped. She unleashed a maniacal cackle. And poor Lardis looked like he was about to soil himself. The cute librarian facade dissolved into pure banshee nightmare fuel. Even Chris had to admit she was terrifying. The second Lardis saw Marie go psycho, he hit the deck, groveling and swearing to fetch the gray pill instantly. Chris smirked. Cooperation was so much easier, adding that he also needed a dagger capable of shredding armor. Lardis looked completely bewildered, but Chris was already walking away. Zero sympathy given bad guys don't get pity. As they rolled back, Marie asked if they were finally ditching this place, but Chris shook his head. One last pit stop. He eyed an apothecary shop and barked at the driver to curb the wheels. Inside, Chris prowled the aisles like a hawk. He started pointing out vials left and right. Marie stared at the mounting pile of loot, asking what the heck this was all for. Chris played it cool, saying he had his reasons, but the vibe shifted when Marie snagged a bottle of heavy-duty aphrodisiac. She smirked, asking if this was for recreational use. Her imagination immediately went rogue, thinking it was finally go time for them. Chris turned beet red, sweating buckets, and stammered a hard no. Marie immediately went full drama queen, striking a legendary anime pose. She teased, asking if it was for the count then. Chris mumbled a reluctant yes. The shopkeeper nodded sagely, clearly thinking Raiden's age was catching up to him. Chris leaned in, whispering that this stays between them to protect his dad's rep. The guy swore secrecy. Cut to Thurn, flagging Chris down outside. Chris flexed, refusing to answer until Thurn used his full ridiculous title, Most Honorable King, Emperor Majesty, Big Brother. Thurn, dying of cringe, warned him the black pill hunt was sketchy and told him to stay safe. Chris smirked, asking if Thurn was catching feelings. Thurn turned tomato red, insisting he just needed Chris alive for their duel. Their dad stepped in, ordering Chris to absolutely wreck those Tiraman losers. Chris vowed he'd handle business. He promised to bring back a win, while Raiden grilled Thurn about what that whole King Emperor nonsense was about. Thurn looked ready to dig a hole and die, dodging the question. Flash forward to Count Tiraman's estate. A goblin butler played bouncer at the gate, telling Chris he wasn't welcome. Chris's squad bristled. Shocked this little guy had the guts to disrespect their boss, asking if he knew who he was talking to. The goblin stammered that he had orders from the young master, calling Chris a useless scrub with zero leverage. Chris raised a brow, asking if that meant he had to find his own crib. The trembling goblin nodded, yes. One of Chris's boys reached for his blade to take the goblin's head, but Chris waved him off. Chill. He asked who was footing the bill for outside lodging. The goblin panic answered, charge it to Count Tiraman. Chris flashed a shark-like grin, verifying the offer. Smash cut to the most bougie mansion in town with killer gardens. The kind of pad that stops traffic. Locals started whispering, betting the rent was 100,000 rupees minimum. Chris laughed, telling the crew that spending other people's money is the ultimate flex. He gave them 1 hour to unpack, promising drinks on him later. But then, a weird shuffling noise came from one of the bags. Marie burst out of the luggage like a jack-in-the-box, raving about how lit the mansion was for serving him. Chris facepalmed, asking why she stashed herself in his trunk. Marie turned on the charm, claiming she was committed to that maid life, and teased that Chris must have missed her, given his shy reaction. Suddenly, the door crashed open. Enter Aloy Tiraman, the third son, screaming about the insane bill. Chris shrugged, cool as ice, explaining that since the host ghosted him, he just upgraded to a place that met his standards. He quipped that VIPs don't stay in dumps. Chris taunted that if Aloy was broke, maybe this would teach him some manners. Aloy, fuming, crushed the invoice and started chanting a spell. Boom. A shadow panther materialized next to him. Chris recognized the magic instantly. The Count's subjugation arts. This wasn't taming, it was breaking a beast's mind with pure terror. It was packed with complex mental attacks and hallucinations. Chris knew mastering it took time, but right now, he just wanted to punt the arrogant cat. He turned to Marie, saying a beast this big required a weapon. Marie popped the inventory, and Chris grabbed his trusty stick, daring Aloy to bring it. Aloy screamed commands, sending the panther in for the kill. The beast lunged, fangs bared. Chris blocked with the wood, but the cat was heavy. Snap. The stick broke, sending Chris rolling. He bounced right back up, joking that 2-on-1 was rude but perfect. If he won, he'd enter the competition as a guard, not a beast jockey. That fit his plan perfectly. Aloy cussed him out, hopping on the panther's back and trash-talking. The panther swiped at air as Aloy scanned for a target, realizing too late that Chris had pulled a ninja vanish. Thwack. Chris appeared behind him, landing 4 solid hits with the broken stick. He laughed, hoping that stung, and told Aloy to save the tears. Aloy retreated, but Chris warned him that crying wouldn't buy him mercy, dropping a massive wave of killing intent. The aura terrified both the rider and the mount. The leopard noped out immediately. Aloy stood there frozen, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. Chris flashed a savage smirk, dropping the bomb that he'd only used a bargain bin 2-star illusion spell. Apparently that was enough to short-circuit Aloy's beast-taming magic. Fuming and turning beet red, Aloy started channeling a comeback spell. The ground cracked open, birthing a nightmare horse monstrosity. Chris didn't even flinch, just stared him down and asked, "Do you even know who you're playing with?" Without hesitating, Chris launched his walking stick like an Olympian javelin. Thwack. Bullseye right between the eyes. Aloy's eyes rolled back and he face-planted. KO. Chris wasn't about to wait around for a long-winded anime transformation sequence. He moved with zero wasted motion, leaving that poor demon pony stuck halfway out of the dirt, glitching out. Smash cut to Chris lounging at a gambling table, leg propped up like he owned the place, casually flipping coins while radiating zero stress. The onlookers were sweating, asking if betting chips was really the priority right now. Chris brushed them off. We got hours before the main event drops. A guy needs his downtime, even if that meant gambling the day away. The crowd insisted this wasn't exactly resting, but Chris just flashed that signature grin, joking that he's the resident loser, so he had to stay in character. He pivoted to Marie for backup, and she beamed, nodding enthusiastically like a proud mom. Her only rule, no booze. A total buzzkill for Chris, but whatever. You don't win arguments with Marie, so he let it slide. Suddenly, that goblin from before crept back in, grumbling about Aloy's orders to babysit Chris, even though spying on a loser seemed like a waste of time. Chris laughed, inviting the spies to join the game instead, promising their boss, who he'd just knocked out cold, would be napping for a while. He swore to keep their slack-off session on the down low, if they just chilled with him. The butler scoffed, telling Chris to stay in his lane, but Chris just shrugged. Suit yourselves, enjoy the show. He gambled the day away until the sun dipped and shadows took over. The goblin and some edgy hyena guy were still lurking. Seeing nothing but bad bets, they figured the rumors were true. Chris was a total NPC, so they yawned and bounced. The second the door clicked shut, Chris's eyes snapped open. The slacker mask dropped. Sharp, focused. He moved to the window, muttered finally, and prepared to leave. He told Marie he needed a solo stroll, no tailing allowed. Marie hit him with a suspicious side-eye, instantly clocking the aphrodisiac in his gear. I knew that wasn't for the count, she teased. Planning a wild night for yourself. She feigned a pout about being left out, then switched up to a cheerful, good luck with your nighttime activities. Chris rolled his eyes so hard it hurt. Chill, Marie. It's not a 17-plus movie. Slipping into the shadows, he headed for the Keaton Mountains. The air there was thick with demon energy, heavy and gross, just like the rumors said. He navigated toward the hunting grounds, spooky as hell checked out. But security, a joke, just 2 guards. Amateur hour. Mentally thanking Marie, he popped an invisibility spell and breezed past them like a ghost. Marie's voice echoed in his mind, side effect of the spell, but he tuned out the noise and pushed deeper into the danger zone. Finally, he located the altar ground zero for the black pill hunt. The vibes were straight up cursed. Suddenly, a memory of Lena flashed in his mind, the fox girl from his old hero squad. She'd spilled the tea. Getting a black pill isn't about capture, it's about psychological warfare. You have to terrify the beast until it wants to check out of life, pushing it to peak horror, then flip that switch to instant bliss. That emotional whiplash turns a dud gray pill into the legendary black pill. That's why House Tierman, the masters of beast domination, ran the show. It clicked. And naturally, Chris had a scheme. With Lena's advice on loop, he calculated the shortcut, hijack their technique. Step 1. Feed the beast his special cocktail, mixed with aphrodisiacs to induce panic, then swipe the black pill. But the clock was ticking, and there was zero chance. To master their complex fear arts tonight, he needed a hack. Suddenly, the hair on his arm stood up, nasty magic nearby. He froze, locked in. He tracked the energy trail deep into the woods until he stumbled upon a cave. Hood up, stealth mode on. Inside, a suffocating red aura washed over him. This wasn't just magic. This was heavy-duty dark arts. A rift to Gehenna, the demon realm right here on Earth. For a split second, Chris actually felt a chill, wondering, what would happen if he lured a beast into this nightmare? A wicked grin spread across his face. Perfect. He had the tools. Trap set. Now, the waiting game. Above him, a massive bat hung from the ceiling watching his every move. As soon as Chris left, the bat morphed. Simon dropped down snickering. He was impressed. The kid stomped Aloy, played the guards like fiddles, and was now trespassing in forbidden zones. Bold, Simon couldn't resist. The urge to pull a chaotic prank was too strong. He slid through the fog toward the Gehenna rift. He shoved his hand straight into the demonic miasma. Blood dripped, staining the earth, and a dark, guttural voice whispered from the void, asking for his desire. A full-blown demon summoning. Yeah, total villain arc confirmed. Dawn broke. The hunt began. Aloy was back on his feet, slamming his flag into the dirt to claim the lead. Chris rolled up, eyeing Alois sideways. Dude was dripping in desperation, trying way too hard to look icy for someone who got absolutely wrecked just 24 hours ago. Alois wasn't having it. He snapped at Chris to zip it, calling him a total fraud for flexing a holy sword he couldn't even swing properly. Chris fired back. Works better than a blunt club, doesn't it? Daring him to run it back. Alois ignored the bait, barking orders to switch focus. Push the Kurojov to the altar, he commanded. He assigned sentry spots, dumping Chris on flag duty like a glorified babysitter. Simon was ghosting through the crowd, but Chris caught the back of his head. Alois got in Chris's face, demanding he confirm the orders. Chris played the good soldier. Later near the altar, some random guard threw shade, telling Chris to get lost so he wouldn't botch the raid. Chris shrugged. Fine by him, less sweat. If it went south, he'd just hit them with the told you so. Alois cut the tension sharp, warning the loudmouth not to burn out before the main event, and ordered him to watch the flag instead. Chris flopped under a tree with Oscar-worthy laziness, waiting for the inevitable disaster. But he was low-key ready, gripping his dagger and the gray pill. The squad tracked weird noises, but Chris felt it in his gut first. Something was incoming, fast. Then the beast broke cover. The intel said deadly level 4 demon, a nightmare on legs. But Chris squinted. Honestly, it looked derpy and weirdly adorable. Damn, he thought that thing is kinda cute. Alois's crew hype-checked him. Time to work. Alois extended a hand toward the Kurojov, channeling the subjugation arts. The squad unleashed a barrage of slowing spells, trying to glue the beast in place as they closed the gap. The Kurojov's eyes twitched. Suddenly, it let out a blood-curdling screech and snapped its head straight at Alois. Alois barely got his guard up before the beast backhanded him into next week, launching him across the clearing. Panic erupted. Poison, someone screamed, pointing at the goop leaking from its feather tentacles. They scrambled to form a shaky shield wall around Alois. On the sidelines, Chris smirked. He knew the score. That wasn't just rage. It was the aphrodisiac he'd slipped the beast, driving it totally feral. Alois scrambled for dignity, stammering that they'd already popped the antidote but warned his crew to stay sharp. The raid turned into a mosh pit. The Kurojov was tunneling hard, launching itself at Alois over and over with zero chill. His team screamed his name, but Alois just clenched his eyes shut, bracing for the pavement. But the hit never came. Someone had stepped into the kill zone, tanking the attack right in front of him. It was Chris, blocking with the holy sword. He roasted the crew, calling them trash for making the useless flag bearer carry the team. "Call me big bro," Chris taunted, "and I'll save your sorry hide." Alois cursed him out. Why would I ever do that? But the poison cloud was spreading and the chaos was peaking. Chris held the line with a smug grin. "Tick-tock. I don't have all day." Alois ground his teeth to dust. "Fine, help me, you jerk," he mumbled. "Better mean it," Chris shot back. Thwack. Chris clocked the beast with the sword hilt, then unleashed his own art. Spectral chains erupted, wrapping the Kurojov tight. Alois stared, jaw on the floor. Chris was using the clan's binding technique. Chris just shrugged off the awe. "Chill, it's not a secret ult," he said. "Just intermediate stuff. Easy work for someone with actual skill." Chris gathered the chains like reins and vaulted onto the Kurojov's back. The beast screeched and bolted. Alois saw the direction and panicked. "Stop. You're heading straight for the Gehenna crevice. Are you crazy?" Chris ignored him. He'd scouted this terrain last night. This was the play. He spurred the beast on, as its mind totally fractured. "Welcome to hell," Chris grinned. For the first time, the beast felt the true malice of Gehenna. Chris drove it right to the precipice. Its eyes shifted from rage red to terror yellow. It was shaking. Chris didn't hesitate, he tightened the noose. With a swift motion, he plunged his dagger in. Dead. The squad scrambled up, breathless warning that this cave was a death trap. "We gotta go now." Chris rolled his eyes. "Don't be soft." He checked the drop. The pill wasn't even the rare black one. Garbage. Alois was fuming, but before he could explode, a minion asked Chris, "You hijacked the raid. What now?" "Drop it," Alois interrupted. "We're alive because of him. It's fine." Chris blinked. Okay, now he felt a tiny pang of guilt, mostly because he'd just swiped the real black pill and replaced it with a dud. "We move," Chris said. "But don't forget, Alois. You owe me a big bro." Alois tried to squirm out of it immediately. "I never signed that contract, and I'm older," Alois protested. Suddenly, the ground lurched. The walls started vibrating like a tuning fork. Rocks rained down. In the pitch black, a pair of massive glowing blue eyes snapped open. Everyone froze. A legit Gehenna demon. Alois turned ghost white. "Chris, run. You're an outsider. Get out while you can." Chris ignored the heroics. His eyes darted up and locked onto a bat near the ceiling, Simon's familiar. Zero hesitation. Chris flicked his wrist, sending his dagger whistling through the air. Splat. The bat dropped before it could beam the intel back. Simon froze. Chris had clocked him the entire time. Even though Simon had strategized to only jump in after analyzing the demon's attack patterns, that plan was officially trash. His bat clone was vaporized, killing his teleport option. Even if he burned his highest tier blood magic to sprint, he was looking at a 5-minute lag, which meant showing up to a graveyard. Screw the plan. He spun around and took off running. Pranks were off the table. He was in full hero mode now. Meanwhile, the demon sized Chris up, genuinely amused, demanding to know what cheap parlor tricks he was hiding. Chris smirked casually, mentioning how much he loathed stalkers. The demon threw his head back, laughing, telling Chris he had serious audacity for a walking corpse. Chris's mind raced, running a threat assessment. For a monster ripped from the Age of Destruction, this guy was low tier, but that still made him a 5-star threat completely out of Chris's current league. The demon raised a hand, weaving dark mana. Chris didn't flinch. He snapped his fingers, triggering his signature sleep spell, dropping the bystanders instantly, just like he did to that girl before. But Aloy fought the drowsiness, screaming, demanding Chris wake them up to fight as a squad. Chris muttered a quick, "My bad," then delivered a brutal gut check to Aloy, knocking the wind and the consciousness right out of him. The demon leaned in close, whispering a bargain hand over the sleeping snacks as sacrifices, and Chris walks away, breathing, maybe even with a shiny demon blessing. Chris looked him dead in the eye and spat. "I don't cut deals with Hellspawn." He manifested his holy sword. The demon sneered, mocking the blade as a useless toy without mana to back it up. Then the monster unleashed a chaotic dark blast. Chris went airborne, slamming into the cavern wall with a bone-shattering crunch that knocked his lights out. Vision swimming, Chris felt himself being hoisted by one arm. The demon dangled him like a rag doll, offering one last choice: betray his friends and live, or stay loyal and rot. Chris let out a dry chuckle, spat blood right in the demon's face, and asked why the idiot thought the holy sword was just for show. Gritting through the pain, Chris wrenched himself free from the grip, flipping mid-air and sticking a perfect superhero landing. He stopped holding back. He ignited his secondary energy core. The broken tip of the holy sword reconstructed itself with a blinding, blazing aura. For the first time, the demon looked genuinely shook. A dark mage wielding pure light. It shouldn't exist. Chris's grin widened, taunting the monster, asking if he was finally terrified that his immortality was expiring today. The demon roared that he wouldn't be stopped, charging a massive, unstable red sphere point blank. Chris widened his stance, grounded himself, and roared the incantation, Dead Sea Cleaving Light. He brought the blade down in a catastrophic arc, unleashing a tsunami of golden energy. The demon stood frozen in disbelief. The wave crashed into him, ripping a scream from his throat. As he collapsed, completely disintegrated, Chris stood there, eyes heavy, looking like death warmed over. He whispered that he'd pushed his limits way too far. His vision tunneled the world, blurring into gray static. Gravity took over, and he pitched forward, fighting to keep a single thought straight. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, Evan asking if Chris had really mimicked his signature move. Chris admitted it was a cheap knockoff. Evan called him a genius, explaining the lore. The Dead Sea Cleaving Light symbolized the single flash that parted the Dead Sea. But the irony stung. Even mastering this legendary technique, Chris had failed to become the Miar clan's beacon. Yet Evan had smiled, convinced Chris would eventually become the light that saved the entire world. Back in the grim reality, a pale blue finger tapped a puddle of blood near Chris's unconscious body. A woman's voice hummed with amusement. Interesting, she mused. It was Mafina, first seat of Gehenna's 7th realm. The rescue team finally stormed the cave, healing potions in hand. As Chris faded out, Mafina whispered that she'd be watching his career with great interest. Cut to Count Tiraman's manor. Chris jolted awake with a splitting migraine. He couldn't believe he'd been out cold for 2 full days. 2 days wasted. At least his mana circuits weren't fried. He scanned the room and spotted the black pill on the nightstand. Score. Then the memory of Mafina hit him. Ugh, unwanted clout. Sometimes villains, who showed potential, got blessed by demons to power level faster. Honestly, he couldn't care less, since that was standard villain starter pack stuff anyway. Besides a 7th realm demon, that's mid-tier at best. A massive lion-maned figure filled the doorway, asking about his recovery. It was the patriarch of House Tiraman, the Count himself. Chris greeted him, attempting to sit up, but the Count waved him down, insisting he conserve strength. Chris played dumb, asking for a sit rep. The Count explained that a specialized task force had swept the cave yesterday. Apparently, the sealing circle to Gehenna had been tampered with. Fortunately, the evidence suggested the demon had been reverse summoned back to hell. It was a brief breach, but a few seconds more, and it would have been a total party wipe. Chris internally questioned if they actually bought the whole reverse summon theory. It made 0 sense, but it was way more believable than a student soloing a 5-star demon. Since he didn't have to cook up a lie, that was a massive win. The Count then shifted his tone, saying he needed to apologize. He felt guilty for treating Chris like trash based on the rumors that he was a talentless loser. The Count bowed deep, his voice trembling with gratitude, as he hailed Chris as the savior of House Tiraman. But Chris just shrugged it off, cool as ice. No sweat, he said. As fellow blood of the Dark Magic clan, watching each other's backs was just family protocol. Okay, maybe he felt a tiny twinge of guilt, but he needed to muddy the waters to play the game. And judging by the Count's reaction, hook, line, and sinker, the Count nodded fervently. You're absolutely right, he insisted. If you need anything at all, just name it. As long as it's within my power, consider it done. Chris pretended to mull it over before dropping the bomb. Actually, I want House Tiraman to bury the hatchet. It's time to let go of the bad blood with House Khazar. We should be allies, not enemies, constantly circling each other. Stop acting like wolves baring fangs at your own kin. Chris leaned in. I want a friendly rivalry. Healthy competition. We could build something real together. Progress. That makes way more sense for blood relatives than this endless feud. The Count opened his mouth to protest, but Chris cut him off with cold facts. You know it's true. The only reason we're at each other's throats is because the main clan wants it that way. It's classic manipulation. From their ivory tower, they see unity among the branch families as a threat. They keep us divided so we remain nothing but obedient guard dogs. The Count's eyes went wide. Are you plotting a revolt against the main clan? Chris scoffed. Please, I have no such death wish. Still, the Count was floored. A kid thinking this many moves ahead. Insane. Chris just smirked at the awestruck look. Thanks for the compliment. So, do we have a deal on my request? The Count let out a long sigh, the weight of decades lifting. I suppose it's time I gave old Raiden a call. Before the sentence even finished, he'd switched to using Chris's father's first name. Chris smiled. Bingo. If they could just unite their forces like this, step by step they'd build an unbreakable fortress against the coming chaos. A true defense for the age of destruction. Suddenly the Count slapped Aloy on the back. Well, don't just stand there. Show him the goods. Blushing furiously, Aloy shoved a gray pill toward Chris. Here, he mumbled. Found it on the cave floor. You were out cold, so I, kept it safe for you. He looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole. Chris raised an eyebrow. Oh, you care. If you're that grateful, feel free to shower me with more gifts. Aloy practically exploded with embarrassment, while the Count roared with laughter. I'll handle the real reward, the Count said, handing over a glowing rock. A summoning stone, capable of housing a rank 4 demon beast. Chris's eyes widened. That was top-tier loot. Also, I'm filing a recommendation. You're going to the sacred dark rite, kid. Make us proud. Chris bowed his head. Thank you. For the gift and the shot at the right. Get some rest, the Count said, dragging a flustered Aloy out the door. The latch clicked. Chris's smile instantly vanished. Show's over, he announced to the empty room. You can come out from behind the curtain now. A crimson aura flared in the shadows. Simon stepped out, clapping slowly. Sharp. I figured it wasn't just luck that you spotted me. To think a child could pierce stealth magic that fooled even the Count. You reek of blood, Chris cut in flatly. Simon bowed an elegant predator. Simon, head butler of the dark magic clan. Chris's mind raced. The Duke's right-hand man. Then it clicked. The name, the aura. This guy was the master of the blood shadow mages. Total bad news. These psychos didn't distinguish between the magic empire or the dominion of light. They were a cult of lunatics obsessed with indiscriminate slaughter and terrorism, and their leader, a monster who had reached the 8-star realm. In the original timeline's endgame, this guy hit 9 stars and became the 10th Demon King. Chris had lost count of how many times he'd nearly died because of this maniac. Standing right in front of him was the living, breathing avatar of the future Demon King of Carnage. I must admit, Simon purred. I never expected the young master to be quite this formidable. Taking down a demon solo. Chris narrowed his eyes. He'd killed Simon's familiar, sure. But how did Simon know Chris was the one who ended the demon? Did he see the Dead Sea cleaving light technique? Chris kept his face blank. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't play coy, Simon chuckled darkly. I inspected the cave. I can spot a lie a mile away. The demon's corpse wasn't just killed. It was erased. Zero trace. That wasn't a reverse summoning. Whatever you did vaporized that thing down to the atomic level. Simon leaned in, eyes gleaming. Explain. The Duke will want a full report. Chris leaned back, crossing his arms. Why should I show my hand? That's my trump card. Because the Duke demands it, Simon pressed. Wrong, Chris countered. If I were the Duke, I wouldn't want a nerd who answers every question. I'd want a predator who keeps his claws hidden until the kill. Simon blinked, genuinely caught off guard. You are truly fascinating. Aren't you going to apologize? Chris asked suddenly. Simon paused. For what? For playing dumb, Chris said. Normally, it's impossible to tell the difference between a reverse summon and total annihilation just by looking at the aftermath. That's why the Count assumed it was a summon. But you knew better, which means you had a reason to dig deeper. Simon finally connected the dots, and honestly, the logic was brutally simple once the panic settled. The culprit behind the disastrous summoning was Simon himself. If word got out that a clan member nearly wiped his own squad, that would be headline news. Scandalous enough to rock the Duke's administration. But when Simon offered to take the fall, Chris pulled a reverse card and buried the secret instead. Now Simon was in debt big time. The guy looked totally floored, stammering about whether this was some sort of transaction. Chris just smirked, implying that if Simon wanted to call it a deal, that was cool with him. Simon got the message loud and clear, swearing he wouldn't forget this lifeline. He dropped the formalities, saying it was an honor meeting him, and he was already counting the seconds until Chris showed up at the main clan headquarters. Chris watched him leave, calculating. Simon wasn't just a random extra. He was a key player for the upcoming apocalypse, and securing his loyalty was non-negotiable for changing the timeline. Cut to the next morning, luggage hovered in mid-air as Marie announced they were prepped for extract. Chris gave her a nod of approval. Suddenly, the door creaked open, revealing Aloy's head. Popping in to check if they were dipping. Chris immediately checked him, reminding the kid to use the proper honorifics. Aloy played dumb. Chris wasn't having it. He let it slide in front of the Count for appearances, but a bet is a bet. Aloy had to call him Big Brother from here on out. Aloy scoffed, pointing out he was literally 2 years older. Chris ignored the logic and asked if he came here just to whine. Visibly annoyed, Aloy dropped the attitude. He was actually here to warn him. Despite the beef, Chris kept preaching about family, so Aloy felt guilty keeping quiet. He told Chris to watch his back, because the biggest hater blocking his entry into the sacred dark rite was young Master Lion. Aloy broke it down. Star levels were just numbers. A 2-star from the main family is built different compared to a 2-star from the branches. We're talking top-tier elixirs, secret techniques, and dark magic buffs. The main bloodline started the race halfway to the finish line while branch members were still tying their shoes. To them, Chris was free XP. Chris just chuckled, flipping the script with a warning of his own for little brother. He told Aloy to sit out the sacred dark rite entirely. He framed it as genuine concern for Aloy's safety. Aloy didn't buy it, accusing Chris of trying to gatekeep all the pure dark energy for himself. But Chris dropped the friendly act. He delivered a cold ultimatum. It didn't matter who stepped into the ring. Anyone facing him in the right would wish they stayed home. Aloy started fuming. So Chris signaled Marie it was time to bounce. He left Aloy with one last piece of advice: don't do something you'll regret. Then it was back to House Khazar. Meanwhile, Thorn was hunting for his sibling, only to find out Chris had ghosted everyone and beelined for the training cave. The butler explained Chris was on a solo grind until the rite began. Thorn finally tracked him down, screaming that ridiculous title, the Honorable King Emperor Majesty Brother. Tone dripping with sarcasm, Thorn reminded him of their pending duel. Chris looked the kid over, genuinely impressed by the power spike. Thorn had already hit the middle 2-star tier. His growth rate was insane. Chris tried to brush him off with the "I'm busy" excuse. But then it clicked. Thorn was also signed up for the Sacred Dark Rite. That complicated things. Chris told him to pump the brakes. They would throw hands after Chris finished his cultivation. Thorn needed to prep too. Thorn demanded a pinky promise. This wasn't another stall tactic, warning Chris not to flake like last time. Chris gave the green light, and Thorn stomped off. Watching him go, Chris muttered about what a stubborn brat he was. But then, a memory surfaced. A girl from his past life as a hero, who used to nag him about promises just like that. Thorn really had her energy. Back in the solitude of the training cave, Chris sat on his bed, inspecting the pitch-black pill in his palm. His expression went dark. He calculated he had exactly half a month before the rite. Zero margin for error. Taking a steady breath, he tossed the pill back and crunched down. Immediately, his face scrunched up. The thing tasted like absolute garbage. But gains are gains. He lay back, focused his mind, and began the extraction process. As the pill's potency flooded his meridians, Chris sensed a glitch. The energy was volatile, far more violent than standard dark mana. There was a buzzing friction inside him. It wasn't just darkness. There was something else contaminating the flow. He analyzed it. Was that light force? It made sense. If this came from a monster, the euphoria the beast felt at the moment of death got trapped in the pill. That residual light was why these pills were poison for normal dark practitioners. But Chris, he wasn't normal. He forced the energy through his circuits, refusing to spill a single drop. Any other fiend would need a master to purge the light contamination. But Chris thought free real estate. Why trash perfectly good power? Instead of filtering it out, he opened the floodgates. He funneled the light force directly into his dormant light core, dual-wielding the energies to cultivate both sides at once. With two distinct powers surging through his veins, each rushing to its respective core, Chris completely devoured every ounce of energy the pill had concealed. His eyes snapped open, blazing with blinding light for a split second before slamming shut again, flickering with the abyss of deep darkness immediately after. The internal cocktail was volatile, but he kept a chaotic grip on it. Cut to a new scene, a sharp woman commanding a subordinate to enter her office. A trembling man walked in, stammering out a report on the investigation she had ordered. He explained that while they were tracking down the black pills, things went sideways. A demonkin crashed the party, and he barely managed to survive the ensuing chaos. He apologized profusely for the lag, claiming the investigation stalled because he had to dig into exactly what went down during that mess. She gave him a cold nod, confirming he had done decent work, and dismissed him before he could sweat through his shirt any further. As the lackey retreated, her gaze locked onto a photo of Chris on her desk. That woman's name, Idine. Fast forward 2 weeks. Early morning silence shattered as Thorn pounded on Chris's door, screaming that the day of reckoning had finally arrived. Chris, already wide awake, told him to enter. Thorn stepped inside and froze, caught off guard by the sheer pressure in the room. Chris felt exponentially more lethal than before, his aura practically leaking raw power, eclipsing the level he was at just half a month ago. Chris smirked, joking that showing up this early meant Thorn was just desperate for a beatdown. Thorn tried to talk smack, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. Chris taunted him, saying if he wanted to catch these hands that badly, he would oblige right now. But the stakes were high. If Thorn lost, he had to forfeit the sacred dark rite. This time, Thorn snapped, demanding an explanation. Chris laid it out cold. The rite is a brutal competition, and weaklings have no business stepping into the ring. Thorn screamed for Chris to shut his mouth and snatched up his sword. Chris just rolled his eyes at the predictability. Realizing his brother was too dense to understand the strategy behind his provocation, Chris decided he just needed to send a message, even if he had to hammer it into his skull physically. Smash cut to the aftermath. It was over in a blink. Thorn got absolutely wrecked off screen. We jumped straight to the infirmary. Their dad stood there looking completely over it, muttering that Chris went way too hard this time. The healer dropped the bad news. Thorn was bedridden for 2 weeks, meaning he had to sit this right out and wait for the next cycle. Thorn tried to protest, struggling to rise, but Chris cut him off, requesting a private moment with his brother. Their father agreed, figuring the boys needed to clear the air. Once the room cleared, Chris asked Thorn why he was pouting and told him to quit whining. The duel was Thorn's idea after all. Thorn glared daggers, spitting that Chris must love seeing him fail. He accused Chris of mockery, of looking down on his grind and purposely injuring him just to sabotage his entry into the sacred rite. Chris shook his head, telling him to chill because they were reading from different scripts. Chris confessed this was actually a calculated move to help Thorn, ensuring he would get stronger for real. If they entered the right as a duo, Thorn would miss his shot at obtaining pure dark energy. Chris explained he had to play the villain because Thorn was too thick-headed to take a hint. But the real kicker, Chris revealed that pure dark energy wasn't even the right build for Thorn. Thorn looked confused, so Chris started breaking down the meta for him. Dark energy wasn't a monolith. There were tiers. Pure dark energy was S tier, sure, but right below it sat gray dark energy. And that specific type was the ultimate fuel for curse magic. He pointed out that Thorn's stats were way higher in curse magic than his mediocre swordsmanship. Right, hearing that Thorn was stunned, demanding to know how Chris could possibly have that kind of intel. Now, Chris couldn't exactly admit he had seen the future, so he improvised a solid cover story. He claimed he analyzed it during their sparring sessions. Chris warned him if he absorbed pure dark energy before mastering gray dark energy, it would bottleneck his growth later. It wouldn't make progression impossible, but the unique properties of pure dark energy would act like a debuff, slowing him down. And Chris wanted his brother to speedrun his power leveling. He told Thorn to sleep on it before the next rite, adding that this was straight-up honest advice from a big brother who actually gave a damn. For the first time, Thorn looked genuinely moved. Then Chris dropped a little gift, a pill. Thorn's eyes went wide. He recognized it instantly, a gray pill, top-tier loot. He asked why Chris would hand over something so expensive. Chris just shrugged, saying simply, "Because you're my little brother. Why else, right?" Meanwhile, we all know our greedy main character already consumed the best loot for himself. Yeah, this watered-down pill was nothing compared to the black one Chris popped earlier. Suddenly, Thorn got super emotional, tears welling up. It was a wholesome moment, but then the mood shifted. Between sniffles, Thorn asked if Chris was always capable of being this kind of brother. Why did he act like such a jerk when their mom was on her deathbed? Did Chris even comprehend the agony she went through? Chris went silent, sitting on the edge of the bed. He quietly admitted he just didn't understand anything back then. The atmosphere grew heavy. Later, the scene transitions to carriages screeching to a halt. Chris hopped out, stretching his limbs. Complaining that his entire body was stiff from the travel, he grumbled that the least they could have done was open a warp gate for a VIP like him. These guys were being incredibly cheap. But all that penny pinching would change the second he took over as the clan head. Marie swooped in like a hurricane of hype, squealing about how insane it was that this was basically a private date. She claimed her heart was about to explode from the vibes, but Chris just deadpanned that she didn't actually own a physical ticker to begin with. Savage. He broke it down for her. The main family ran a tight ship and only allowed a single +1 for the event. And since Marie was practically handcuffed to his soul by their magical contract, she was the default pick by necessity. Strutting through the venue, Chris noticed the air getting thick with gossip. Marie elbowed him, grinning that he was already reaching celebrity status with all the side eyes they were catching. Chris felt the weight of 100 stares. He caught snippets of shade thrown his way, people muttering how bizarre it was to see him walking with that kind of unearned confidence. Then bam, Simon's voice sliced through the murmurs loud and clear, "Young master." Heads whipped around, jaws dropped. Simon the head butler was bowing to Chris. The atmosphere instantly shifted from judgment to pure confusion. Why would a VIP waste breath on the notorious clan troublemaker? Whispers spiraled about what the Duke's right-hand man was plotting. Simon just flashed a knowing smile, ignoring the peanut gallery, and remarked that even though it had only been 2 weeks, Chris had leveled up significantly. Chris literally rolled his eyes, asking if the Duke's top guy didn't have a better grind to focus on. Unfazed, Simon kept his cool. "Not at all," he replied, smooth as silk. He was on a mission directly from the boss. The Duke wanted a face-to-face meeting. Immediately. Simon peered closer, noting Chris didn't look shook by the invite. "You expected this, didn't you?" Chris shrugged it off as surprise, but Simon wasn't buying the act. The kid hadn't even blinked. Cut to black. The scene reopened inside the clan head's opulent quarters. Simon ushered Chris in. "He is here, my lord." The Duke sat there, an unmoving statue of pure intimidation. Marion stood by his side like a shadow. The Duke glanced up, his voice gravelly. "It has been some time since we last spoke." Suddenly, the air got heavy. Chris felt a crushing gaze lock onto him. A presence so massive it felt like gravity just doubled. He fought to keep his knees from buckling. His hands trembled as waves of dark energy radiated off the Duke like heat from a furnace. Unleashing that kind of aura on a rookie, total power move. Honestly, kind of toxic. It was a savage flex, but it proved the old man was a beast. Chris gritted his teeth, forced his head down, and showed respect anyway. The Duke cut the small talk, not surprised by this sudden summons. "I figured my phone would ring eventually," Chris shot back. The Duke raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and why is that?" "A new star just rose in the clan," Chris said confident. "Hard to miss the shine." The Duke actually let out a chuckle. "Sharp," the Duke admitted. He noted that even his top lieutenants were hyping Chris up, but he still had his doubts about the endgame. Then came the lecture. He reminded everyone that a seed might look elite, but only time reveals the harvest. Fast growers often rot the quickest. Facts, Chris agreed without hesitation. I'm still too low level to meet the hype just yet. So you doubt your potential, the Duke pressed. The future is unwritten, Chris countered. Maybe I'll be a mighty oak. Maybe I'll be a weed that chokes out the whole forest. But I won't disappoint. The Duke grinned, satisfied with the grit. I'll be watching, the Duke said, waving him off. Once the door clicked shut, Marion turned to her master. Well, he exceeded expectations, the Duke murmured. But massive talent is a magnet for chaos. A storm is coming for the Magic Empire. Yet, I feel hope. Marion looked stunned. The Duke stared into the void. Perhaps he is the one to finally grant the wish I've carried for so long. Fast forward. The night of the sacred dark rite arrived. The herald's voice boomed Count Raiden Khazar's eldest son. Enter Chris, dripping in finesse. The room was full of high-fashion looks, but the shade was instantaneous. Why is the Duke entertaining this loser? Total pretty boy behavior. Chris brushed off the hate. Standard procedure. It was the tax you paid for being this gorgeous. Marie was loving it, floating around him like his personal hype man. Chris ignored the haters and laser-focused on the refreshments. Jackpot. The booze table. He reached for the hard stuff, but a waitress shut him down cold. ID check. You're underage. She slid him a ginger ale. The bystanders snickered at the rejection. Chris groaned. Lame, he muttered, staring at the fizzy kid's drink. He needed a stiff one, not sugar water. Suddenly, the main event started. The heavy doors swung wide, revealing the VIP lineup of young nobles. Chris went into observation mode. Ishid, the second young lord, marched in. Then Julian, the first young lady. Chris smirked. I know those faces. Even the elusive faces hit the scene. Second young lady Jupian and third young lord Isaac finally made their entrance. But get this, the head count was suspiciously low. Only 4 of them stood there. Someone was missing from the picture. Chris clocked it instantly. The first young lord was completely MIA. His gaze turned deadly, eyes shadowing over as Chris figured Eshed would have something to say, especially since his little stunt had totally trashed Chris's rep recently. But Eshed, that jerk, just breezed right past without even a glance. That really ticked Chris off. After all that drama, the dude couldn't even look him in the eye. Like Chris was just some insignificant bug he'd already squashed. But then Julianne stepped up, looking like pure royalty. She dropped a polite curtsy, lifting her skirt just a fraction. Okay, that actually caught him off guard. He clocked her immediately. His aunt had warned him to watch his back around Julianne. But looking at her now, she didn't seem like a threat. Whatever. He'd file that intel away for later. He'd done enough scouting for one night. Time to dip and get ready for the main event. He turned to leave, but some guy materialized behind him, clearing his throat loud enough to wake the dead. Name's Fowler, the stranger grunted, claiming he was a summoner for young Master Lion. Chris, barely stifling a yawn, asked, and I should care because… Fowler smirked, saying he heard some unqualified amateur was sneaking into the sacred dark rite tomorrow and he was worried. This nobody would choke and embarrass the clan. Chris cut the crap. You talking about me? Fowler shot back. If the shoe fits, prove me wrong. Chris glanced up at the balcony and saw Lion staring daggers at him. Chris thought, if Lion's got beef, he should drag his butt down here and settle it man to man. Chris was down for whatever. He wanted to see what cheap tricks Fowler had, but Fowler waved it off. Not here. I don't even have my gear on me. Chris actually laughed out loud. You serious? I don't need a weapon to squash a rat like you. Fowler growled that Chris would regret crossing him. Chris just shrugged. Pretty sure you're the one who's going to be crying later. By now, Julianne and Julian were locked in, Julian studying Chris like a lab specimen. A moment later, the crowd erupted in gasps. Suddenly, everyone realized why Chris was so unbothered. He was getting the royal treatment. Spirits were literally hand-feeding him grapes like he was a king. Meanwhile, Fowler, dude was getting ragdolled by his own summons. Chris just waved a hand, and the spirits turned traitor instantly. The room went nuts, whispering about the insane power needed to hijack someone else's spirits. Chris cocked an eyebrow at the balcony. Is this the best you got? Lion pretty sad for a dark magic heir. Total humiliation. If Lion wanted a fight, he should have stepped up. Lion, looking flustered, snapped. This isn't on me. I didn't order that. Chris scoffed, telling Lion. Yeah, nobody's buying that, but I'll let it slide. For now. He promised they'd settle the score. At the sacred dark rite, adding, you're acting like a total coward, by the way. But he'd teach him some manners. Soon enough. Fast forward to the big day. Chris rolled up yawning, looking like he just woke up from a nap. Zero nerves. Eloy wandered over, baffled. Dude, aren't you sweating it after yesterday? Chris grinned. Yo, little bro, why are you even here? Told you to stay home. Eloy got all flushed. You think I'd skip the sacred dark rite just because you said so? You're crazy if you think I'm missing this. Just then, Lion descended the stairs, glaring at the room like he owned the joint. Chris looked up and muttered, just you wait. Suddenly, a crusty voice cut through the noise. Is everyone present? It was Sebastian, the head butler. He announced he was taking charge and leading them to the rite's location. He slammed his staff down and boom, the floor lit up in wild, psychedelic colors. It was like an acid trip. Everyone froze as a spiraling stairway twisted up from the ground. Chris narrowed his eyes. That's not real space. Gotta be an illusion, a pocket dimension for the test. But Sebastian didn't wait. He took off down the magical stairs at Mach speed. Panic mode engaged. Everyone realized they were getting left in the dust. Sebastian wasn't playing. If you wanted to survive, you had to hustle and stay on his heels. People started gripping. This place gives me the creeps, someone whispered. Feels like we're walking into the underworld. And that slope, brutal. Even Lion and Aloy were huffing and puffing, fighting to keep up. Sebastian barked. Move it, the ground disappears if you're too slow. Sure enough, screams echoed as kids slipped and plummeted into the endless void. Sebastian decided they needed a push, and sped up even more. Keep up or die. More participants tumbled off the edge. Lion sneered, trying to look tough. Weaklings deserve to fall. But look closer, he was sweating bullets. Chris left Lion in the dust, cruising by with zero sweat on his brow. He threw a look back, teasing Lion for already sounding like a wheezing engine. Then he went for the jugular, joking that a direct air really should have better cardio than this. That hit a nerve. They'd pumped Lion full of high-tier potions, but the guy was all hype and no stamina. Chris finally broke down why the others were struggling. No point grinding inside an illusion. In this fake dimension, physical effort was basically a glitch. It didn't register. Your energy bar wouldn't drain unless your brain bought into the lie. Chris admitted he just hacked the spell's logic a little, essentially turning on God mode. Sebastian watched, eyes widening as he finally clocked the identity. Chris was Christian, the heir to House Khazar. Meanwhile, the rest of the squad dragged themselves to the checkpoint absolutely cooked. Then there's Chris, looking like he just left a spa. Alois, gasping for air, demanded to know the secret sauce. Chris smirked, told him if he hit the gym instead of relying on his mount for everything, he wouldn't be dying right now. Suddenly, a voice cut through the chatter. A floating crystal drifted in, introducing herself as Rahu, the manager of this sacred ground. She dropped the lore. They were standing in the sacred darkness, the zone where the planet's purest dark energy erupts. The mission today, secure that raw, high-grade darkness. Just like the third-rank Demon King, the OG founder of the Dark Magic clan. As she monologued, blue light flared under their boots. Bad news though, supply is limited. Not everyone is eating tonight. Every beast on the path was a vibe check to see if they were worthy. Chris, blunt as a hammer, cut in. So it's a speed run. Rahu liked his sharp instincts, but Chris wasn't done pressing for info. He needed the PvP settings. If players started throwing hands, would they get banned from the server? Rahu clarified that the paths were instanced, so running into each other was pure RNG. But if paths did cross, the smart play was to ignore the beef and keep moving. Time is money. She started the countdown, wished them luck, and said stay alive. The timer hit 0 and absolute pandemonium erupted as the pack scattered down their lanes. On the sidelines, Sebastian tried to goad Rahu into a wager, betting some blood juice on the winner, but poof, Rahu vanished. Totally ghosted the old man. Oof, rejected. Sebastian stayed chill though. Lion blitzed down his tunnel, radiating confidence. He ran straight into a monster swarm without flinching. They were spitting fire, but Lion charged his fists with aura and started wrecking shop one by one, swatting them like flies. He scoffed. These second-tier scrubs were beneath his pay grade. At the same time, he was certain Chris was dealing with nightmare fuel, because Lion had secretly slipped cash to a mage to rig the deck. As far as he knew, Chris was dead meat. The rules ignored casualties, so technically murder was legal here. Lion figured this tunnel was Chris's tomb. He spotted the door to the end zone and smirked. Thinking he bagged first place, he kicked the door open. And there was Chris, looking bored out of his mind. Chris yawned, asking what took so long, said he almost died of old age waiting. Lion froze, brain malfunctioning. Chris shrugged it off like it was nothing. Lion stammered, no way, claiming Chris's route. Should have been a death trap. Then he realized he just snitched on himself. Too late to backpedal. He basically admitted to pulling strings, a secret that definitely wasn't supposed to leak. Chris grinned, the puzzle pieces clicking. No wonder the difficulty spike on his path was insane. It was all Lion's dirty work. When Lion tried to shut him up, acting all high and mighty, demanding respect, Chris just laughed. Just the two of us here, bro. Quit the theater kid act. Lion, trigger happy and losing his cool, snapped, calling Chris a cocky trash bag. He yelled screw the rules and decided to flatten him right there. He launched a haymaker. Chris read him like a book, weaving past every swing with zero effort. He noticed. Lion was using magic combat arts, dirty close-quarters bursts designed to maim, meant to snap joints instantly. But Chris was a ghost, slipping every wild punch, which only tilted Leon more. Finally, Lion saw a gap. Chris's guard dropped. Lion charged in, convinced he had the win, yelling he was going to snap Chris's bone. Chris called him a fool, locked his wrist, and wrenched it back into a brutal hold. Don't cry now. Snap. The sound was crisp, and Leon's scream echoed down the tunnel. Alois scrambled up moments later, terrified he missed the action. He rounded the corner just to see both of them. Another rival kissed the dirt, totally demolished. Eyes popping out of his skull, Aloy stammered, asking if Chris was the architect of this destruction. Chris smirked at his laggy reaction time, asking if Aloy was going to nap on his own, or if he needed a helping hand to reach Dreamland. Refusing to bail, Aloy barked back that he hadn't been chilling this whole time, and dared Chris to bring the heat. Spoiler alert, he got folded like laundry instantly. Chris just shook his head at the boring replay of events. Figuring a search party would scoop them up, eventually Chris left them there. Then his vibe shifted from playful to deadly serious. Eyes locked on the horizon, he mapped out the endgame. In 5 years, the first great war with the Alliance erupts, and he needs to grip the dark magic clan's full might by then. With the competition wiped off the board, he wasn't about to split a single drop of the sacred darkness. He marched forward to claim the whole jackpot. This sacred darkness wasn't just some shiny trophy. It was the catalyst for a fiend to hit true transcendence. The Duke absorbed 80% and became a top-tier demon monarch. The legendary Dark Destroyer soaked up over 90% to achieve Demon King status. But if Chris could drain the tank a full 100%, he'd eclipse even the Demon Emperor himself. Facing the roaring vortex of shadow, Chris extended a hand, letting the energy flood every circuit of his being. The pressure was crushing. Gritting his teeth, he forced it down, claiming it all. Meanwhile, outside the zone, total pandemonium erupted. Word leaked that everyone but Chris got eliminated. The crowd spiraled, calling it a catastrophe, with whispers that young Master Lion was knocking on death's door. Haters screamed cheat, accusing Chris of using illegal artifacts and demanding an immediate investigation. Jupian didn't flinch, telling the mob to cool it, since Chris wouldn't survive the sacred ground anyway. 2 full days of silence meant he was either drinking the shadows or had already been pulverized by the pressure. Since even the Duke hit a hard ceiling, Jupian was betting on Chris being finished, likely reduced to cosmic dust. Stomping away, Jupian seethed, muttering that even if Chris pulled a miracle, she'd end him personally. Memories surfaced of her father dying against the Alliance, leaving only her and Lion to be adopted by Viscount Langham. Her footing in the clan was slippery at best. With Lion out of the succession race, she was terrified her support system would vanish, and she pinned every bit of it on Chris. Vowing vengeance, she stormed off, while the crowd kept roasting the trash-tier Chris for not emerging. They figured he was toast karma for biting off more than he could chew. A few snickered at Marie Chris's ride or die. Mocking the ghost for waiting on a corpse, Marie wasn't having it, and blasted a magic hole through a heckler's bag as a warning shot. With a sugary smile, she suggested they zip it, or she'd turn the whole lot of them into specters for her personal collection. The crowd scrambled instantly. Marie flipped the switch back to cute mode, whispering that waiting on a guy was seriously uncool, but she knew her master would return. Meanwhile, inside the void, Chris was soaking wet and fighting for his life. This sacred darkness played for keeps. The infinite shadow felt like a noose, and he'd barely cracked the 70% mark. It was tougher than he calculated. He forged ahead, knowing the real nightmare started at 90%. Overloading his core meant total detonation. He'd be dead before the war even kicked off. Brainstorming a solution, he realized he needed a dragon heart. Dragons rocked the most durable cores in existence. If he could just simulate that physiology for a few minutes, he might just survive this gauntlet. Visualizing the beast, he doubled down, letting the energy rampage through his veins. His core started to fracture and quake. He was seconds away from snapping. He hit his ceiling time to bail. Suddenly a voice echoed. Mafina materialized, looming over him as a colossal demoness in the abyss. Shocked, Chris demanded to know how a demon crashed this party. Mafina explained that darkness is basically their chat room. Slipping in here was rookie stuff for her. She offered an assist free of charge. Suspicious as ever, Chris asked what the catch was. Mafina just giggled, called it a mood, and told him to grab her hand if he wanted to conquer the darkness. 1 week later, the tension in the main hall was thick. Setting down his tea, the Duke muttered that betting on Chris's survival was a long shot. Radio silence from the sacred ground. Marion looked baffled, wondering what kind of power-hungry lunatic takes it this far. Simon chimed in that even Viscount Langham was over it, and wanted to seal the entrance as soon as possible. The Duke sat in contemplation. Simon pressed, asking if he should shut it down right now. Simon was really just poking the bear to read the room. The Duke turned the tables, asking for Simon's honest take. Did the reckless brat have a pulse? Simon admitted the statistics were practically zero, but he confessed that Chris was such an anomaly, nothing was guaranteed. The Duke held the silence, and finally, the verdict came down one more day. 24 hours hard stop. Marion slumped, exhaling the tension she'd been holding in her chest. Simon vowed to relay the Duke's ultimatum, but miles away, trapped in the abyss, Chris was circling the drain. His dragon heart was toast, shattered into useless dust. Agony seared through his veins as he grabbed his chest. Hacking up blood, Mafina loomed over him, hand outstretched. Take it, she urged. Last chance before you fade out for good. Chris just glared, deadlocked on her eyes, and swatted her offer away. Idiot, she spat. No human survives this void. It's suicide. But a smirk tugged at Chris's lips. He reminded her exactly where they were, the space of concepts. Here the laws of physics were just suggestions. Boom. A jagged bolt of lightning tore from the sky, detonating around him and bleaching the endless black with blinding white fire. Mafina flinched, blindsided. A chaotic white aura spiraled around Chris. His irises ignited into crimson pools, and twisted horns erupted from his skull. Full demonization, the ultimate flex of the Dark Mage clan. This was forbidden tech, a taboo hack, allowing a mere mortal to hijack a demon's form and unlock god-tier power. Usually, it's a death sentence. Even the OGs didn't survive it. But in this glitched-out dimension, Chris found a loophole. By skipping the incantations, he could forge a vessel without the backlash. Chris looked like he was about to snap, veins bulging. But he stayed locked in, sculpting raw light between his palms. He dragged every ounce of sacred darkness, screaming into his core. 90%, nah. He was gunning for the full 100%, a tier of power that was pure fantasy to everyone else. Mafina's jaw hit the floor. She stared at the black crescent moon standing before her, demanding answers. How could a mortal, a literal bug, shatter the reality of the darkness dimension? Who are you? She screamed. What are you? Chris just shrugged, unbothered. Figure it out yet, he pointed skyward. I'm a genius on a whole different level. Then, with a casual wave, he ripped a hole in space-time and stepped toward the exit. Mafina cackled, genuinely impressed. See you soon, kid. Chris looked less than thrilled. But right before he crossed the threshold, he reached back and flipped her the bird. Screw you, he shouted. Mafina froze, blinking in disbelief, before dissolving into hysterical laughter as the portal snapped shut. Chris reappeared, muttering, she is so annoying, definitely blocking her contact info. He checked his internal clock, felt like about a week had burned by. The manor was probably in meltdown mode, waiting for his corpse to wash up. He let the demonization fade, and decided to play a little game. Cut to the mansion, a butler bursts into the office, panting. Master Chris is back. The room went silent. Nobody expected him to be alive. Viscount Langham, the acting boss, stiffened. Go on. The butler stammered that Chris was barely clinging to life. Then, the healer stepped up, dropping the bomb. I sense his dark magic, but it's murky, corrupted. Translation. Chris was washed up. He'd never wield magic properly again. Immediately, the whispers started. Of course, that delinquent messed it up, tried to grab 80% and choked. Rumor was he got greedy and spilled the sacred darkness everywhere. Verdict: Chris was a liability. Langham nodded, solemnly adjourned the meeting, and cleared the room. Once the doors clicked shut, Langham turned to his shadow, McField. Is the healer right? McField, who'd been spying on everything, nodded. His core looks damaged, sir. Langham drummed his fingers on the mahogany desk, eyes cold. The rhythmic tapping made McField sweat. You could practically hear the gears of a new scheme grinding in the Viscount's head. Langham finally broke the silence, muttering about Leon. He was supposed to be the sacrifice for the poison mage ritual, he hissed. Total waste. His master plan to eliminate Jupiter and Lion in one go failed. And now, word on the street was that his father was taking an interest in Chris. Disaster. It felt like an invisible hand was wrecking his chessboard. He paused, letting the tension build, before dropping the order. Drag Chris to the Dark Hall tomorrow. I want him judged in front of the entire clan. Smash cut to the Dark Hall. Chris stood dead center, surrounded by Langham and the family's heavy hitters. The air was thick with killing intent. Langham wasn't playing games. He'd packed the room to ensure Chris took the fall for the chaos. Langham leaned forward, voice grave. Do you understand the gravity of your failure at the right? Chris didn't flinch. Yeah, I got it. The Viscount narrowed his eyes. Explain yourself. Chris kept a poker face. My mistake, I should have crushed Lion harder. You know, to really rep the family's ruthless reputation. I failed because those losers are still breathing. The room exploded. Elders stood up, veins popping, ready to scream. But Langham raised a hand, silencing the mob. No, he said coldly. Here is your real sin. After draining the family treasury dry, Chris still hadn't brought home a single trophy to justify the cost. Chris pushed back, asking what exactly counted as a win here. Viscount Langham's eyes went cold as he dropped the ultimatum: 70% purity of the sacred darkness. Anything less, you're irrelevant. Chris shot back, asking what happens to the failures who can't hit the mark. The Viscount didn't sugarcoat it. Miss that 70% threshold and you're cut off. No more dark magic lessons banned from the estate, and you can kiss the family title and your future goodbye. Chris scanned the room, demanding to know how they planned to grade him, when nobody there looked capable of measuring that kind of power with any real accuracy. Before anyone could clap back, Eshed threw his hand up, sporting a nasty smirk and calling Chris little brother with zero respect. He pointed out that since Chris's core looked murky as hell, a good old-fashioned magical collision would expose exactly what he was working with. Eshed announced that if Chris could hit 70% and somehow manage to overpower him, it would prove Chris wasn't just all talk, and the whole family would have to respect the stats. Someone from the crowd broke it down. A magical collision is exactly what it sounds like. A raw, brutal clash of mana where purity is king. If mana pools are equal, dark magic steamrolls everything else. But when two dark mages of the same rank throw down, the one with the purer darkness takes the crown. The loser usually ends up with a shattered core. It was the most savage way to settle a beef. Chris called Eshed out, noting this was way shadier than he expected. But he decided to roll with it. He countered with his own terms if he won, if the whole room witnessed his dominance. Viscount Langham had to officially back him for the air trials. The room went dead silent. While the elders looked shook, Eshed grinned, loving the audacity. Why should it matter if you're main line or branch family? When you're aiming for the throne, raw power should be the only vote that counts. The relatives started whispering, wondering if Eshed was losing it, actually suggesting they rewrite the succession rules for a branch kid. Eshed locked eyes with Chris, the playful mask dropping. He warned Chris that messing this up meant blowing out both their cores. For this little experiment, Eshed would stick to safe second-tier magic matching Chris's rank, but flexing different purity levels. They squared up, charging their energy until the air in the room felt heavy. Thick black auras crashed into the space between them. Chris kept it ice cold, telling Eshed to relax. He wouldn't want to wreck that precious core of his over a little sparring match. Eshed scoffed, saying Chris talked a big game, but he was dying to see if the kid's darkness was actually legit. As the clash kicked off, Chris cranked up the output. He flooded the space with darkness, and instantly the collision started to swallow everything. Eshed threw at him. Chris's magic coiled around his opponent's aura and snuffed it out like a candle. Eshed started sweating, completely baffled, shouting that Chris was neutralizing his attacks without even drawing on extra reserves. Eshed decided to stop playing nice. He unleashed a massive second-tier upper-class spell, but Chris swatted it away like it was a minor inconvenience. Realizing he could end this whenever he wanted, Chris released a heavy pulse of his true aura, sending a shockwave rippling through the hall. Eshed's spell evaporated instantly, and Chris let out a bored sigh. Eshed was acting like the main character, but honestly, his magic was mid at best. Pushed to the edge, Eshed snapped. He conjured a violent purple vortex, spiking his aura all the way up to the 4th tier. The violet energy spun like a hurricane, and the entire room froze. Nervous whispers broke out if Eshed fired off magic that heavy. Chris's core wouldn't just break, it would disintegrate. The spell morphed into a feral dragon, jaws unhinged, rushing straight for Chris. But Chris didn't flinch. A colossal hand materialized from his shadow, stretching out and snatching the dragon out of the air like it was a toy. Eshed's face went pale. Chris dryly reminded him that, when you play with high-tier magic in a duel, you better be ready for the consequences. Permanent damage is part of the game. He expanded his magic, crushing it against Eshed's dragon. Suddenly, Eshed's spell shattered into nothing, and he collapsed, coughing blood all over the stone floor. The hall erupted into panic. People were screaming for medics, realizing this wasn't a spar, it was an execution. Chris watched Eshed drop, thinking he'd actually gone too easy on him. He had aimed to permanently wreck Eshed's core, but the trash managed to wiggle out of the worst of it. Damn. Chris felt a twinge of regret. Gasping for air through bloody teeth, Eshed admitted defeat, announcing to the room that Chris's purity was over 90%. The crowd was floored, and Chris flashed a winning grin, asking if that was enough clout to earn his shot at the heir title. Viscount Langham drummed his fingers on the table, calculating. He honored the deal. Chris could take the test. But since there was no playbook for a branch member making a run for the top, the Viscount decided he would design the challenge personally. First, Chris had to prove his raw talent, then pull off the impossible. He had to deliver a miracle worthy of a future leader. Chris demanded specifics, so the Viscount laid it out: reach 3-star rank within 3 months. Chris threw his head back and cracked up. Is that all? Please. He flashed a cocky grin. I'm a genius, remember. This is nothing. Viscount Langham narrowed his eyes, voice dripping with skepticism. Talk is cheap, kid. Let's see if you can deliver. Later, the scene shifted to Eshed, sitting across from Langham, tea steaming between them. Langham looked visibly rattled, shaking his head. I expected better, Eshed. Eshed clenched his jaw, forced to swallow his pride. I messed up. I totally slept on Chris's potential. The backlash. Eshed rubbed his chest, grimacing. It might have actually cracked my core. His eyes darkened. We need to deal with Chris, right now. Before he becomes a monster we can't stop. But Langham just sipped his tea, completely unbothered. Relax. The kid is chasing a ghost. He'll never make it. There's a reason nobody tops 70% purity. Every single drop after that. It doesn't just get harder. It becomes a nightmare. Even hitting 3 stars is going to take him years. Genius or not, that mountain is too steep. Langham smirked. He's finished before he even starts. Cut to Chris's room, where the vibe was totally different. Marie spun around, presenting a steaming plate like a master chef. Ta-da, dinner is served. She was practically vibrating with excitement. Did you hear? The whole estate is talking about you? Her eyes sparkled. You were so cool out there. Total main character energy. My heart was literally about to explode. Chris looked away, ears turning pink. Okay, chill out, Marie. You're embarrassing me. But she just beamed at him. Her smile softened into something sweeter. You know, waiting for you. It made me realize something. She looked down. I missed you. Like every single day. Every second you were gone felt like an eternity. Chris froze. The raw sincerity in her voice hit him harder than any attack. She really cared. Suddenly memory lane hit him hard. A flashback to his glory days as a hero. Lena was there, hovering over him like a mother hen. Are you hurt? Show me. Rainia watched from the sidelines, rolling her eyes playfully. Please. Chris is way too fast to get tagged by those scrubs. But hey, better safe than sorry, right? Lena shot Rainia a look. Funny coming from you, seeing as you're the one panicking. Me worrying. Rania crossed her arms defensive. No way, that was Evan sweating bullets, not me. Watching them bicker, a real unforced smile broke across Chris's face. After the hell of that nightmare family, this piece felt like a dream. Back in that house, they wanted him dead. His past life was nothing but bloodstains and knives in the back at every turn. But this warmth was alien. Evan stepped up, dropping a heavy grounding hand on Chris's shoulder. And deep down, Chris just knew. These people, they were his anchor. All the words he swallowed in his past life. This time, he wasn't holding back. He was doing it right. Back in the present, he locked eyes with Marie. Thank you. She froze mid-step. He said it again, firmer this time. Thank you. For waiting for me. I mean it. Marie turned beet red, flustered. About time you noticed, she murmured, voice shaky. My heart is thumping so hard right now. Chris snorted, ruining the moment. Marie, for the millionth time you don't actually have a heart. Marie didn't miss a beat. She winked. That's only because you stole it, dummy. Chris blinked. Damn. She was smooth. That comeback was lethal. He sighed, defeated but smiling. All right, since you waited. How about a reward? Let's go for a walk. Marie lit up like a Christmas tree. For real, you're not teasing me. Chris nodded. Dead serious. Let's bounce right now. Moments later, they were strolling through the garden. Marie was positively glowing in the sunlight. And honestly, Chris was vibing with it too. It's nice to just breathe for a second, Chris mused aloud. But his internal monologue was racing. The road ahead was savage. Hitting 3 stars, that was going to be a grind. He was on the clock, and asking the branch instructors for help was a waste of time. Wrangling 90% purity alone was borderline suicidal. Suddenly, a familiar voice sliced through his thoughts. Well. Still stirring up trouble, aren't we? It was Aunt Marion. Chris grinned. Been a minute, Auntie. Good to see you. Marion didn't waste time on pleasantries. Not exactly the time for a romantic stroll, is it? Did you find a master yet? Chris raised an eyebrow, hopeful. You offering? Marion laughed and shook her head. Not me. But I know exactly who can handle you. Follow me. Chris shot Marie an apologetic look. She just smiled and waved him off. She was a pro at waiting by now. Marion led him deep into the estate, down a dizzying spiral of stairs and halls. So Chris asked, who is this mystery master? Just be glad I found him. Marion didn't look back. Save your thanks. You might actually hate me for this once you start. None of your siblings survived this guy's training. This is a once-in-a-lifetime shot, Chris. Don't choke. They entered a silent, empty chamber. Standing there, a little boy. Alone. Chris blinked, confused. Is this kid lost? He walked over and patted the boy's head. Hey buddy, where are your parents? The kid looked up, and the glare he shot back, absolutely lethal. Chris's blood ran cold. The dots connected instantly. Marion's voice was sharp. Show some respect, Chris. Meet the family head's incarnation. Chris snapped to attention, bowing low. The Duke's eyes bored into him, a terrifying black aura swirling around his small frame. Over 90% purity, the Duke mused, voice heavy with power. Impressive. But tell me, boy, do you realize how incredibly stupid you are? Chris didn't make excuses. He nodded. The Duke continued. Even I stopped at 80%, and I hit a wall that breaks most men. Without the Demon King's blessing, even our ancestors would have been crushed by that kind of power. And you're trying to go even higher. The Duke grinned, dangerous and wild. So I have a proposal for you. With a mere thought, the Duke could have ripped that volatile dark mana straight out of Chris, saving the kid from his own dangerous potential. But Chris wasn't having it. He asked permission to speak freely, and the second the Duke nodded, he dropped a bomb. Why is the Dark Mage clan fading into obscurity? Marion cut in, voice sharp, demanding to know what he was getting at, but Chris didn't back down an inch. He laid it out cold. Sure, the Duke led them well, but compared to the other demon families, they were dead last among the 12 great houses. The Duke leaned forward, the truth, hitting home. It wasn't about leadership, it was raw power. They didn't have a single mage past the 8-star level anymore. Chris twisted the knife further. The last time the Blood Monarch Demon King came for them, their heavy hitter, the legendary Nordia, was already in the grave. No 8-star titans to defend them. Just a few 7 stars trying to lead an army of 10,000. And it wasn't enough. They got crushed, reduced to servants, proving that without top-tier monsters on your side, numbers mean nothing. Chris locked eyes with the old man. He promised he understood the risks. He knew the Duke was terrified this darkness would consume him before he could grow. But he also saw the hunger in the Duke's eyes. The unspoken hope that maybe, just maybe, this forbidden power was the key to a new golden age for the clan. The Duke threw his head back and laughed. He told the kid he talked a big game, warned him not to regret it, and instantly cast a spell right at Chris's feet. The floor disintegrated. Chris didn't even have time to scream before he was free-falling into the abyss, crashing hard into a pitch-black forest. He shook off the dizziness, trying to get his bearings, when a disembodied voice echoed the objective: inherit the dark mana, survive. Suddenly, a massive two-headed bear erupted from the shadows. Chris froze, cold sweat dripping, and mumbled a single thought: I am so screwed. He didn't know the half of it. High above in the estate, the Duke and Marion were watching the whole thing unfold on a crystal orb like it was primetime TV. Marion whispered that this was insane. Throwing a kid who was barely 2-star level into a pit with grade 4 beasts, it was a death sentence. The Duke didn't care. Deciding one nightmare wasn't enough, he snapped his fingers and summoned a second horror, a grotesque, scaly rock lizard. Marion flinched silently, apologizing to Chris for the living hell he was about to endure. The Duke just shrugged. His logic was brutal only by clawing for his life. Would Chris truly understand the heart of dark mana? True power awakens at death's door, and while Chris was down there fighting for survival, the Duke casually turned to Marion. Did you get the goods? Marion sighed, and unveiled a tray piled high with sweets. The Duke dove in, explaining that high-level magic gave him a serious sugar craving. Drama burns calories, apparently. As he chewed, he snapped his fingers again, and a wave of darkness swept over the forest below, blotting out the light. He grinned like a maniac, declaring that every good horror show needs a night setting. He wasn't hiding his excitement anymore. Laughing loud enough to shake the room, he was hyped to see his grandson undergo the family's special brand of torture training. Back in the pit, Chris sized up his executioners, the hulking two-headed bear and the armored rock lizard. He knew the math. One hit from either of them, and his bones would be ground to dust. Suddenly, the lizard shrieked and spat a glob of acid. Chris threw himself sideways just in time. The acid hissed, melting a hole straight through a massive tree trunk. One mistake meant instant game over. But he kept his head. This was training right. He shouted at the sky, asking if the Duke was listening. The Duke raised an eyebrow. Down below, Chris reasoned out loud. You wouldn't throw me into a meat grinder without a way to win, right? But Marion knew the truth. There was no secret switch. Chris had to figure out how to drop monsters that were leagues above his pay grade. She joked that this wasn't about growth. It was just the Duke enjoying a front row seat to his grandson getting pummeled. Chris wiped the sweat from his brow and grinned. Fine. If this was a twisted round of Street Fighter, he was playing to win. The bear charged, and he ducked. Fast, too fast, he muttered. But as he weaved through the attacks, he started to see the pattern. There was a way to turn the tables. Watching the orb, the Duke let out a breath. The kid had serious talent. His movement was fluid, way beyond any normal rookie. Marion agreed, but reminded him he's still just a child. But before she could finish, the scene shifted. Chris was standing victoriously over the bear's corpse. Silence filled the room. The Duke and Marion were floored. How the Duke demanded. How did he drop it? Chris, panting, explained his read. The bear had tank-level defense and power, but its agility was trash, and it had zero magic resistance. He waited for the split-second opening and injected a lethal dose of dark magic straight into its pumping heart. Marion gasped. She knew that technique. Simon strolled into the frame, grinning. Dark death, he noted. A classic move from the Duke's playbook. The Duke stayed silent, processing. But the fight wasn't over. The rock lizard was still hungry. Chris squared up. One down, one to go. The lizard whipped its tail like a wrecking ball. Chris slid underneath, dodging another acid spray. He analyzed the beast, 3 stone hearts, hidden deep inside. He knew the lore. If he didn't shatter all 3 simultaneously, the thing would just keep reviving forever. Chris focused, spinning his dark aura into a razor-sharp net. He whipped it over the lizard, the magic tightening around the vital points. With a violent yank, he crushed all 3 hearts in one go, shattering the beast into shards. Simon practically jumped, hyped up by another perfect execution of Dark Death. But the cool moment evaporated instantly when Simon leaned way too close to the viewing orb, blocking the shot. With his view completely obstructed, the Duke shoved Simon aside, grumbling at him to back up because he couldn't see a thing. Turning to Marion, the Duke demanded to know if she was the one who taught Chris these moves. She shook her head, denying it. The Duke muttered that it was impossible for anyone to download that level of skill so quickly anyway. Simon started yapping about how Chris might be able to skip the tutorial and bypass basic dark magic training entirely. The Duke immediately shut that nonsense down, declaring the show was over and the trial concluded. A glowing magic circle snapped into existence, warping Chris right back to his starting point. The Duke admitted the kid was better than advertised. Chris immediately hit him with the ultimate glaze, claiming it was all thanks to the master. and that he'd absorbed a ton of knowledge about applying dark magic just from that brief clash. That level of delusion left Marion and Simon speechless, convinced that both teacher and student were absolutely out of their minds. The Duke warned him to check his ego. Playtime was over now, the real dark magic lessons began. He ordered Marion and Simon to clear the room, and Marion looked visibly nervous as the heavy door clicked shut behind her. Now isolated, the Duke's aura shifted. He told Chris to start his training by answering one question. What is dark magic? Chris didn't hesitate confidently, stating it was the power to dominate opponents with absolute perfect darkness. The Duke pressed him, challenging the definition of perfect darkness. Chris paused, actually thinking it over. But without giving him a second to breathe, the Duke told him to keep his eyes peeled as he began unsealing a dormant power. The entire room began to quake. Pure magical energy crackled across the floorboards. The Duke began to chant, "For all darkness resides there." Chris's senses were instantly overloaded, as reality warped around him in bursts of psychedelic color. "Walk and walk again as you descend the deep stairs, 12 abysses shall await." The Duke continued, listing colors black, purple, blue, while shimmering geometric shapes flooded the air. Emerging from the eye of the storm, a weapon materialized. The Duke gripped it, and with terrifying speed, thrust it straight at Chris. Chris could literally feel the pressure slice the air. Cracks ripped through the fabric of reality behind him. He instinctively clutched his throat, eyes wide with horror, because it felt like that blade had just slashed through his neck, like wet paper. The Duke calmly explained that this was a conceptual blade. It ignored physics and cut only what it wanted to cut. This was the ultimate force of the Black Sword, sculpted entirely from dark magic. He dismissed the weapon and gave Chris an ultimatum: 1 month. If Chris could manifest the Black Sword himself, training would continue. With that mic drop, the Duke marched out, leaving Chris standing alone in the silence, completely unable to process the absolute power he just witnessed. 1 week flew by. Chris spent his time grinding, running, and practicing in solitude. He stripped off his shirt, hoping to see a shredded physique, but reality hit hard. He was still looking like a twig. He figured he needed to bulk up his calorie intake. Refocusing, he sat down and poured every ounce of his mana into forming a dark sword. He muttered to himself that this was way harder than it looked. He had lost count of his attempts. Even when he managed to summon the blade, holding it together for more than 10 seconds was a struggle. Plus, it was like a cheap knockoff compared to the primal, suffocating darkness of the Black Sword the Duke had unleashed. He kept grinding, looping that strange chant in his head like a broken record. "As you descend the deep stairs, 12 abysses shall await. O crow, who seeks wisdom, accept it, praise it." Chris sensed a hidden code wrapped inside those words. 1 month later, the Duke strolled toward the training grounds, chatting with Marion. He told her that after this much failure, Chris should have finally learned his place. He asked if Marion was still stressing over the kid. Marion shot back with a question. Was there a faster method? She reminded him there were only 2 months left until the admission exams. The Duke explained that with the raw purity of dark magic Chris had, trying to speedrun his growth was impossible. If they rushed it, he'd just hit a massive wall. Building a solid foundation was the only play here. So forget the exam, they needed to teach Chris the essence of dark magic first. But the moment they stepped onto the training grounds, the Duke froze in his tracks. Right there in front of him, Chris was casually waiting with a dark sword humming in his hand. Chris looked up, smiling, saying the head of the family finally showed up and he was wondering when he'd arrive. The atmosphere shifted. Everyone was shook and couldn't believe their eyes. "Is that thing real?" Chris thanked the Duke, saying that because of his guidance, he managed to hit the 3rd tier way faster than scheduled. He admitted that, as the Duke could clearly see, it was just a bootleg version at best. Sure, it took about a week to manifest the Black Sword, but that was just scratching the surface. He brought up that cryptic chant. The Duke had recited specifically the 12 abysses part. He asked if the goal was to infuse all magic attributes into the Black Sword right. The Duke watched this unfold, breaking into a cold sweat. He thought about our crafty protagonist and the true nature of the Black Sword. This kid hadn't just beaten the odds. He might have understood the assignment too well. Just manifesting a basic Black Sword usually took a year of grinding. And to actually comprehend the 12 magics to awaken the true form, a lifetime wasn't enough for most mages. Chris actually pulled this off in a single month. This guy's talent is completely beyond human logic. Could he be the anomaly found at the end of forbidden magic? A grin crept onto the Duke's face. Seeing this, Marion was terrified. She hadn't seen the Duke smile like that in ages. The Duke looked at Chris and told him to be ready. Tomorrow, the real work starts. With a warning that the training ahead would be absolute hell, the Duke vanished, leaving Chris standing there in the dust. Chris didn't flinch. He just flashed a confident grin, trusting the Duke's brutal methods. Internally, he was hyping himself up, buzzing with the thrill of clearing the first hurdle. Time to celebrate. He made a beeline for the nearest spot, overflowing with booze. "Jackpot," he cheered, soaking in the moment. He was finally sipping on the top-shelf liquor that was way out of his league. in his past life. But he had to be stealthy. Getting caught by Mary was not an option. Just as Chris was trying to keep a low profile in the shadows, a voice cut through the noise. Christian, getting wasted in the middle of the day again. Chris turned to see a woman standing there. He racked his brain. Who was this chick? Judging by the glow in her eyes, she was definitely a third circle mage. She didn't have that gloomy look of a dark magic user. "Do I know you?" he asked casually. That was the wrong move. The woman looked absolutely floored, then furious. You little jerk," she stammered, winding up and slapping Chris so hard he hit the deck. Immediately guards swarmed in, restraining her. "Princess, please, let's go. Don't waste your energy on this trash," they urged. Watching them drag her away, Chris wasn't even hurt, just annoyed. "What was her deal?" he muttered, dusting himself off. "Talk about an overreaction. Who does she think she is?" Acting all high and mighty, suddenly the instructor who had guided him to the right earlier stepped in, snatching the bottle from Chris's grip. That was Princess Marissa Genius, from the Extreme Poison Mage family. The name hit Chris like a truck. Wait, the Extreme Poison Mage? He paused. Is she my fiancée? The instructor shot him a dry look. To be precise, she's your ex-fiancée. Oh. Chris realized things just got way more complicated. Meanwhile, as Marissa stormed off, a memory forced its way to the surface. She was back to being 8 years old. A small, lonely child standing in the middle of a suffocating aristocratic gala at her own mansion. She hated it. Everyone ignored her to suck up to her brother. She stood there, wondering why her father even bothered dragging her to the Extreme Poison Estate if she was just going to be invisible. Then, she felt eyes on her. Whispers floated through the air. "That's the illegitimate child," they sneered. Has Duke Huang lost his mind? Just because his son is useless, he thinks he can use a daughter to buy a son-in-law. Marissa clenched her fists, trying to keep her composure. Suddenly, a mini version of Chris strutted over, radiating pure playboy energy even back then. "Yo, what are you doing all alone?" he asked, calling her kid. "I'm not a kid, I'm Marissa," she snapped. "All right, Marissa," he smirked. "I'm Christian." Chris leaned in, his voice dropping. "Don't listen to the garbage adults spout. Just get strong and make them pay when you grow up." He winked. "You get me. Okay, pause for a second. Drop a comment below. Guys, do you think Child Chris was actually being sweet? Or was he just trying to rizz her up early? Anyway, back to the scene. Marissa, blushing, slightly nodded. "I will," she vowed. "I'm going to be the strongest demon practitioner alive, and make them eat every word." Chris grinned, clearly impressed. "Now that's ambition. Exactly what I'd expect from the Poison Mage bloodline. Since you're going to be the strongest, I better stay on your good side." He laughed, dubbing her the future queen of demon arts. Then, with smooth confidence, Chris offered his hand to the girl clutching her doll. "May I have the honor of giving you a tour of the estate?" That was the moment Marissa fell for him. But back in the present, she violently shook her head, banishing the memory. That was ancient history. Even if it was just a political engagement for peace, she used to stay up all night dreaming about their future. But that naive girl was dead. Marissa pushed open the heavy doors to Viscount Langham's office. "Lady Marissa," he said, smoothing his expression. "It's been a while." "Viscount," she nodded coldly. "What brings you here?" he asked, though he probably guessed. Marissa cut to the chase. "You're aware a relic has spawned in the neutral zone between our territories." The Viscount leaned back, eyeing her. "And what does the Extreme Poison House plan to do? You took the last one. Are you stepping aside this time?" Marissa didn't flinch. She actually smiled. "Not a chance. Would you back down if the roles were reversed?" So the Viscount mused. "You're proposing a contest." "Exactly," Marissa confirmed. "We both send a team. First to find it keeps it." She raised a finger. "But here's the rule. 10 practitioners max and no one above 3-star rank." The Viscount realized she was trying to prevent an all-out war. "Correct," Marissa said. "Spilling too much blood right now only helps our enemies, especially with the 4-king-star politics being a total mess." The Viscount mulled it over, tapping his desk. "Very well. I accept your terms." Marissa narrowed her eyes. That was too easy. Suspiciously easy. However, the Viscount added with a dark grin, "I have one additional condition. If the Poison Mage clan breaches the contract, they lose everything. The current artifact forfeited to the Marquis. And that new loot they just secured? Gone." When she pressed for details, the Viscount smirked. Breaking the rules meant sabotage. "We're talking dirty plays. Traps, ambushes, backstabbing, literally the Poison Mage's entire playbook." Marissa swallowed her rage, barely keeping her composure against his nonsense. She shut him down, accepting the extra terms through gritted teeth. The Viscount leaned in, asking if she'd personally lead the Suicide Squad. "That's the plan," Marissa shot back cold. The Viscount laughed, saying he couldn't wait to see the legendary toxicity of her magic in action. He was practically drooling at the thought of the violence. Sickened by his attitude, Marissa gave a stiff, obligatory bow and bailed. "We'll be waiting for you on the battlefield," was the unspoken vibe as she walked out. The second the door clicked shut, the Viscount stood up and stalked over to the chessboard in the corner. He grabbed the Black King. violently smashing it into the queen and knight pieces. Muttering Marissa and Jupian's names, he promised a show, not a fight, but a symphony of screams. He slammed the final piece down. Checkmate. His face twisted into a look of pure nightmare fuel. Fast forward 2 months. The seasons were shifting, dead leaves crunching underfoot, signaling the change. And Chris, he was on that relentless grind, leveling up his training like a beast every single day. But the vibes were shifting for everyone. Marissa was haunted by ghosts of her past romance, looking totally out of it. Elsewhere, a silhouette stared out a window, plotting power moves, while siblings schemed in the background. A mysterious figure slipped through the shadowy back alleys unseen. Cut to the grand hall. Chris stood surrounded by a squad of tough guys. Viscount Langham, the big boss, stared him down. "Showtime," Langham demanded. "Prove you're not trash." Chris prepped himself and boom, a jagged purple aura exploded around him. The energy was wild. Langham's henchmen absolutely lost it, terrified he was about to unleash the legendary dark sword. Chris just smirked, entertained by their panic. Watching their faces melt with fear was honestly kind of hilarious. But this was a calculated move. Flashback to the Duke's advice, never show your full hand to Langham. If Langham knew Chris's true power level, he'd make the next test impossible. He had to keep the ace up his sleeve. So Chris throttled his power down, smiling like he was clueless. Langham bought the act, nodding approval at the decent skill. "Round 2, Langham announced. "We've got intel on a special artifact in the neutral zone." The kicker, the overpowered ultimate poison dark magic family, was hunting it too. Langham dropped the offer, helped secure the relic. And Chris gets officially recognized as the heir. Chris thought the job sounded suspiciously easy, but asked if he could run it solo. Negative. Langham shut him down. He was forcing Chris into Princess Vivian's unit. He added, "This was supposed to be Rowan's gig, but you can take the shot." He framed it like a favor to a nobody. Chris played along and exited. Behind him, Langham's face morphed into a twisted predatory grin. A minion whispered, "Will the kid mess this up?" "Trust the process," Langham scoffed. "It's all going according to script." Later in the garden, Chris was deep in thought. The mission felt off. Why hand him a job meant for the golden boy Rowan? He dug into his memories. Rowan was the original heir designate before vanishing during the Great War. The details were sketchy at best. He turned to his companion, the spirit in the fox body. The fox looked up, demanding payment. "You want the lore? Keep the head scritches coming." As long as Chris petted him, the fox was ready to spill the tea. It started with the Devil's Relic incident, a brutal clash between the Dark Mage House and the Ultimate Poison Clan. It was a cover-up job. The fox revealed the Dark Mage squad got completely wiped out hunting that relic. Both sides buried the truth, but bodies were piled high. That cover-up, the fox explained. That was the domino that toppled everything, the seed of the apocalypse. After that disaster, the Dark Mage Duke died, killed by Langham's own son. That betrayal allowed the Demon King of Evil Blood to hijack the family leadership without breaking a sweat. The fox emphasized that this specific event was the catalyst for the current chaos. Chris frowned. "Why does this matter to me right now?" "Because history repeats itself." Chris connected the dots. The previous representative died in this exact scenario. This wasn't a test, it was a setup. He wasn't replacing Rowan, he was being sent to the slaughterhouse just like the others. Langham's opportunity was a death trap. But without hard proof, Chris couldn't flip the table just yet. At only 3rd level mastery, he wasn't OP enough to brute force his way out. He had to play 4D chess to survive. So our boy decides it's time to bounce. But just as he tries to exit, Juven pulls up out of nowhere, blocking his path. She calls him trash and demands to know his destination. Chris hits her with a cold stare, asking if it actually matters. Juven snaps back, saying she heard he's crashing the expedition. She claims she just wants to ensure the job gets done, since that was supposed to be Rowan's gig. Chris smirks playfully, guessing she just wants him on the bench. Then he drops the truth bomb. Langham only drafted him because he didn't trust Rowan to handle the heat. Hearing that, Juven absolutely loses it. She literally hurls a bladed weapon right at Chris's face, but our MC, totally unfazed. He tilts his neck just 1 inch, dodging her. Strike like he's in the Matrix. Juven is left speechless, staring at him. Chris decides that's enough soap opera drama for one afternoon. He tells her straight up that they hate each other anyway, so he won't bother her until the real show starts. He announces he's off to handle some business, and even sarcastically wishes her luck with her little prep work. Total power move, Chris strolls away, radiating main character energy. Meanwhile, Juven stands there retrieving the steel she just tossed. Internally, she's shaking. She realizes Chris is dangerous because he didn't even flinch. He knew she wasn't actually going for the kill. Deep down, she admits Christian is way more terrifying than she ever calculated. Outside in the Dark Mage village, the streets are buzzing. Chris struts through the market, surrounded by shouting vendors and chaos. Bro, this place is alive. Our MC decides to test his RNG with some gambling, and naturally, he completely cleans out the locals' wallets. But hey, he treats himself to some fire-grilled skewers with the winnings looking totally blissed out. He muses that life would be peak if he could just feast and game forever. But while he's munching and vibing, his radar goes off. Someone shady is tailing him through the alleyway. The guys look like Langham's lackeys. Definitely spying. Such a buzzkill. He remembers that the guy's shop is nearby, so he figures he should take out the trash first. Suddenly, a hooded figure reaches out, snatches Chris from behind and clamps a hand over his mouth. Yo, total jump scare. Chris tries to scream, but the stranger hisses at him to shut up and drags him into the shadows. Pinned against the brick wall, Chris is shook. He's wondering who the heck this is. The figure lowers her hood. It's a woman Chris has zero memory of. She whispers that he had a tail, but her squad already handled them. Chris glances over and sees the spies unconscious on the pavement, sleeping like babies. He quips that her method of protection is a little intense. He demands her identity right now. The girl claims she's trying to stop the creepy corruption spreading from the Evil King Castle. When Chris hears Evil King Castle, the vibe shifts instantly. That's heavy. She explains the situation is critical. People from the castle are vanishing into thin air, and safe zones are being demolished. She reveals the castle is caught in a brutal war between three families, and the leaders couldn't care less about the collateral damage. That's why she's recruiting help from different clans to stop the villains, but she needs to offer a trade. She turns to face him squarely, dropping the bait she has intel that could save his family. She exposes that Marquis Langham is conspiring with a VIP from the Ultimate Poison Dark Magic family, their master plan. They want to assassinate Marissa, the heiress of the Ultimate Poison clan. Chris is mentally reeling. He thinks, wait, they aren't just targeting us but Marissa too. The logic doesn't add up. It sounds insane. The girl explains that, if this scheme succeeds, both families will collapse. Then the true overlords of the Evil King Castle will seize absolute power, and the balance of the 12 Dark Mage families will be shattered. That spells apocalypse for everyone. The girl stares at Chris with intense eyes. Chris looks a bit spaced out for a second. She says she hopes Chris is ready for the relic hunting quest. She also drops a line hoping he'll rise as the young lord and protect the peace one day. Chris figures if this girl knows about the relic, her spy network is god tier, but he's not buying it just yet. Chris tells her he needs collateral if she wants his help. No receipts, no deal, that's his rule. The girl gets flustered, stumbling over her words. Chris trolls her, saying she's empty-handed. Panicking, she whips out something shiny from her cloak and shoves it at him. Bro, he just hustled her. Transaction complete. Chris says peace out and dips. Left alone, she looks super moody. She wonders why she couldn't reveal her true identity to Christian. A mysterious shadow on the wall answers, saying it's for her own protection. If Christian got caught and spilled her name, it's game over for everyone. She agrees. Suddenly, her gray hair shifts to a deep red, and the shadow drops her name, Idrine. It insists this is all for the greater good. Idrine sighs, saying she gets it, and they decide to wait and watch the chaos unfold. Back in the market, Chris is hyped. Look at that smug grin. He inspects the VIP card the girl handed over. Talk about lucky. Just what he needed. It triggers a flashback to his past life, back when he and the boys. Before this moment, the dark auction house was a fortress, totally gate-kept against outsiders. But this single card, it was his golden ticket to the big leagues. Chris scanned the alias etched on the plastic Leah the Wolfman, a complete nobody in his memory banks. Trusting a ghost like that was risky, so he kept his guard way up. Better to have a contingency plan. He strutted over to a message stall, the clerk gesturing that he could scribble his dispatch right then and there. Chris penned a quick encrypted note and strapped it to a massive carrier owl. As the bird took flight, a smirk played on his lips. Phase 1 was officially in motion. Adrenaline surged through his veins. Time to hunt down his target. Chris marched straight toward the towering, opulent facade of the dark auction house. The place screamed old money, marble gold, an atmosphere so heavy with wealth it felt like it would crush a commoner. At the entrance, a hulking security guard stepped in Chris's path, barking at him to get lost. Apparently, Chris didn't look the part of the elite. Chris didn't even flinch. He adjusted his pristine white and gold mask and flashed the VVIP card. Pure main character energy. The guard's attitude flipped instantly. He went from bully to bootlicker in a split second, trembling as he realized he almost kicked out a VVIP. Suddenly, it was red carpet treatment. Every guard in sight bowed low, practically begging him to step inside the sanctuary. The interior was blinding chandeliers, dripping in crystals, the elite mingling. A nervous employee with twitching elf ears scrambled over to intercept him. The elf stammered, asking if he was the esteemed Leah the Wolfman. Chris didn't hesitate. Yep, that's the name on the tag today. He cut through the small talk. With zero patience, he demanded the elf escort him straight to the branch manager. To make sure the point landed, Chris flashed a smile that was less friendly and more serial killer. The terrified elf nodded so hard his neck almost snapped. Moments later, Chris was lounging in a VIP suite that cost more than most people's lives. The elf bowed out, sprinting to fetch the boss. Chris surveyed the room. Top-tier luxury. Exactly what you'd expect from the legendary Rudolph Merchant Group. The Rudolph Group wasn't just a company, it was a titan. Along with the Union Deer Group, they were the untouchable kings of commerce. Between the two of them, they had the dark magic empire's economy in a chokehold. No competition. The word on the street was simple: if the Rudolph Group couldn't find it, it didn't exist. The door creaked open. Enter Ruvid, the branch manager and head honcho of this shadowy auction empire. Ruvid offered his services, but Chris cut straight to the chase. Bring me Rowena. Ruvid froze, playing dumb, asking if Chris actually knew her. Chris chuckled darkly. Know her. He leaned in, dropping the bomb that Rowena was standing right in front of him. The tension snapped. Ruvid's magical disguise dissolved like smoke. The male illusion shattered under Chris's gaze, caught in 4K. Ruvid, now revealed as the stunning sorceress Rowena, stood there in shock. Chris remembered all the headaches she gave him in his past life. Karma is a wheel, and Chris decided it was her turn to get played. When she demanded to know how he saw through it, Chris just shrugged. That relic you're using, total garbage. He ruthlessly critiqued her magic, joking that the camouflage was too weak to hide her massive ego in her face. Rowena looked ready to explode. Pro tip: never insult a powerful mage's appearance, unless you want to see instant rage. Chris kept the pressure on. He admitted he wasn't Leah, a fact she clearly knew but told her to zip it. He leaned back, dropping a heavy threat: cooperate, or he'd start leaking secrets about her shady side hustles to the public. That wiped the anger off her face, replacing it with fear. She asked what his price was. Chris just gave her that signature arrogant smirk. Defeated, she agreed to fetch his request. A bit later, Chris walked out, weighing a heavy sack of gold and gems he'd swindled from her. Absolute robbery. He told her the funds were strictly for saving the world ingredients, spinning a hero narrative while emptying her pockets. Internally, he calculated the odds. This haul wouldn't make him a god, but it was enough to counter Langham's nasty little schemes. Langham was always playing 4D chess, and Chris refused to be a pawn. That night, Chris strolled past the training grounds, where knights were sweating buckets, clashing steel. Jupian yelled over, trying to rope him into sparring. Chris waved her off. He had zero interest in grinding XP with swords when he had bigger plans. He tossed a casual good luck over his shoulder and kept walking, unbothered, uninterested. Rowan, watching from the side, lost it, calling Chris a lazy punk. Jupian had to step in, telling the hothead to cool off. She figured Chris was destined for mediocrity anyway since he wasn't training. Little did she know he was playing a completely different game. The next day, Chris returned to the merchant group to finalize the deal. Rowena handed over a box of rare herbs, probing him about his plans. Chris played coy, claiming ignorance. Rowena, looking done with his attitude, slid a wooden chest across the table. Chris popped the lid. Inside sat a golden frog and a piece of patterned black cloth. Weird loot drop. It wasn't exactly legendary gear, but beggars couldn't be choosers right now. Rowena headed for the exit, dropping a cold reminder he better keep his mouth shut, especially after the massive payout she just handed over. Chris swore he was a vault, even as Rowena made it crystal clear she never wanted to see his face again. But that familiar cocky smirk returned. He dropped a bomb. War is on the horizon. Rowena froze, completely blindsided. If the Union and the Magic Empire clash, the entire continent gets dragged into the meat grinder. He laid it out. War means blockades. The major trade routes get choked off, and merchants on both sides are gonna crash and burn. Rowena did the math. She'd lose half her empire overnight. Still, she tried to play it cool, calling him dramatic. I mean, who starts a war for kicks, right? But Chris pushed back. The rumors swirling in the capital aren't just noise. It's a ticking time bomb. She glanced at the intel in her hand, and her gut sank. He was right. Even the high society elites are whispering about conflict. But that begged the question, why is he spilling all this tea to her? Chris flashed a grin. If she wants to keep her vaults full, maybe she should step up as his official sponsor. He's playing the long game, trying to engineer a future where the war never happens. Rowena looked lost, so he broke it down. The Southern Wizard Tower is the ultimate choke point. If Chris ascends to the throne as the Duke, he controls the board. He can stop the catastrophe before it starts saving the world, and more importantly, saving Rowena's bottom line. He demanded an answer. Is she in or is she out? He extended a hand to seal the deal. Rowena locked eyes with him, no lies detected. It was a solid gamble. She took his hand but issued a sharp warning. Lie to me once and I'm gone. Our MC just waved it off, breezing out the door while calling her Miss Moneybags. Rowena fumed, but Chris was already laughing his way down the hall. Typical. Later, back in the safety of his quarters, he got to work grinding those herbs. He needed an antidote fast. The ultimate poison dark magic family wasn't to be messed with. If they start trouble, he needs to be ready. But he hesitated. It's been ages since he brewed this stuff. Will it still work? Suddenly, memories from his past life flooded back. He saw himself as a kid being scolded for being too slow. Faster focus. The voice belonged to a woman named Flora, the legendary leader of the medical clan. She was grilling him on his fire control, bragging that her clan mastered the flames like no other. Our boy sighed. She was always nagging. But then his mind drifted to their first meeting, the blood-soaked battlefield of the First War. The Demon King, Evil Blood, had decimated her people. The medical clan was nearly extinct. Young Flora was forced to lead amidst the slaughter. The Demon King wasn't taking prisoners. He wanted every healer dead to remove the threat. Flora was barely hanging on, coughing up blood in the rubble. Chris's medicine pulled her back from the brink. In that moment, she trusted him with everything, handing over the clan's secret technique book. It was incomplete, but it was all she had left. Save the suffering, she begged him. Let me rest in peace, knowing the legacy lives on. Chris accepted the burden, officially calling himself her student. Flora managed a weak smile. She knew she'd bet on the right horse. The memory faded to a shot of Chris standing alone in a vast field of flowers mourning his master. He went on to become the 27th head of the medical clan. On the battlefield, they didn't just call him a healer, they called him the Saint. Every life saved was a promise kept to Flora. Back in the present, Chris stared at the small pill in his palm. He silently hoped that wherever Flora was in this timeline, she was living a good life. He vowed to honor her legacy no matter the cost. Meanwhile, miles away, a messenger bird cut through the sky. It swooped down toward a massive fortress, the Marquis's estate. A servant rushed the urgent letter to the Lord. The Marquis lit up, finally word from his boy. He tore it open, thinking Chris was growing up to be just as formidable as his mother Marion. But as he read on, his curiosity turned to concern. The smile vanished. His expression hardened into pure seriousness. He barked an order to the servant. Get everything ready. We need to prepare for my son's next move. Now, the gears are turning. But right now, it's mission time. The Dark Mage family's expedition squad, huddled in a thick, foggy forest looking shaky. Team leader Jupian laid down the law. No solo heroes. Stick together. Groups of 2 minimum. The team nodded like good little soldiers. But you know, there's always that one guy. Chris stepped up. I'm going solo. Jupian's jaw dropped. Excuse me, our boy shrugged it off. He works better alone. And the real reason, looking at this group was like watching clumsy insects. If he stuck with them, the ultimate poison magic would wipe them all out in seconds. Chris wasn't about to sit around waiting to get ambushed. But Jupian checked him, reminding him they were deep in a zone crawling with nightmare fuel. We're talking grade 4 monstrosities here. If things went sideways, nobody was coming to save them. She wasn't done lecturing yet, though, warning him not to get himself clapped by the enemy. Classic Chris, he just shrugged it off and tossed her a small pouch. Inside, high-grade antidotes specifically designed to counter the ultimate poison Dark Magic family's toxins. He told her he was already dosed up, so she should take the rest. Jupian was about to refuse out of spite, but Chris threw a little shade her way to goad her. That did the trick. She snatched the meds just to shut him up. Suddenly, the clearing ahead filled with tension. The ultimate poison. Dark Magic family arrived with Marissa front and center. She smirked, sensing trouble in paradise. Jupian instantly called them out for lagging behind. But Marissa wasn't having it. She claimed she was right on schedule and called Jupian impatient, adding a snarky comment about her actually behaving for once. Then she dropped the ground rules: absolute ceasefire. No sabotage, no ambushing rival squads while the mission is live. Jupian scoffed, acting like she wrote the rulebook. Marissa looked annoyed, reminding her they were still enemies. But frankly, she seemed bored of the conversation. Enough talk, it was go time. Marissa's squad signaled they were locked and loaded, and her crew mobilized. Jupian watched them fade into the brush, deciding it was time for her team to make a move too. But yo Chris, he plays by his own rules. He completely ghosted his team, breaking formation and sprinting off solo, totally ignoring orders. He even ripped off his comms device and spiked it on the ground. Absolute savage behavior. Jupian watched him vanish, thinking the guy had lost his mind. Like who ditches their lifeline? Meanwhile, deep in the timber, our boy was already throwing hands with a feral, demonic beast, and making it look like child's play. With all the demon realms he conquered in his past life, spotting a monster's vitals was automatic. He could do it blindfolded. Even a grade 4 beast was nothing. He struck the kill spot instantly. Then a thought of Jupian popped into his head. Was she actually worried about him back there? Nah, no way. He brushed the thought aside immediately. That Ice Queen doesn't do feelings. Anyway, he pushed deeper into the creepy forest, his senses on high alert. He knew the scheme to take down Marissa had to be in motion, but he hadn't spotted the ambush setup yet. Figuring he needed more intel, he scanned the area, only to spot Marissa in the distance. They locked eyes instantly. Chris realized he'd wandered straight into the enemy's path. Big oops. He played it cool, offering a quick apology, mumbling about a wrong turn before trying to bounce. Marissa told him to watch his step, her vibe way colder than before. But the gears in Chris's head were turning. He realized the trap wasn't for him, it was designed to crush Marissa. Who was pulling the strings? Was she just a sacrificial pawn? He decided to poke the bear and ask a risky question. He called out, asking point blank if her family actually hated her. Oof, that hit a nerve. Marissa's expression twisted into pure rage and hurt. Her face flushed red, and she practically screamed that he was trash. Chris actually felt a pang of guilt for prying so hard. In his past life, he never really got these noble types. Maybe he had misjudged her situation. Suddenly, Marissa snapped. She fired a poisonous magic needle straight at him. It zipped past his ear and embedded itself in a tree, sizzling on impact. Okay, that was terrifying. She demanded a proper apology, and seeing her fury, Chris realized this wasn't just family drama. Someone else set this trap, and he needed to find the puppet master before they struck. Even if her squad was cooperating, he doubted anyone would make it out alive. He needed to stall for time, until backup arrived. So Chris pointed at the sizzling tree. Marissa was breaking the truce. That just made her angrier, demanding to know what he was talking about. The MC pointed to the smoking wood. She threw the first punch, which meant the Dark Mage family forfeited the relic rights. Marissa denied it, claiming self-defense since Chris insulted her lineage. Fueled by the humiliation of their broken engagement, she justified the attack in her head. Then Marissa went full beast mode, unleashing a massive cloud of neon blue and purple poison magic directly at him. The toxic fog swallowed him whole, and he started hacking. She smirked, asking how he liked the taste of her blue flower magic. She bragged that one snap of her fingers would send the toxin rushing into his veins. Apologize, she demanded, or beg for your life. But standing there in the deadly mist, Chris looked unbothered. Like a total boss, he wasn't taking a single hit point of damage. Marissa went to snap, but Chris was faster. He snatched her wrist midair. He leaned in, telling her that cheap trick wouldn't work. Dang, bro is just on a different level. Marissa looked like she'd seen a ghost. She was shook. She couldn't process it. She was certain she held the only antidote in existence. But Chris, being the absolute maniac genius he is, he started lecturing her about his physician's oath. He revealed he brewed his own custom version, the perfect detox pill, and he looked pretty stickin' proud of himself. Marissa dismissed his warning as pure gibberish, but bam, lights out. Chris knocked her cold before she could finish the thought. She folded like a lawn chair. He scooped her up mid-fall, whispering for her to just take a nap and chill out. He swore a solemn oath to protect her life, then proceeded to tie her to a tree. Okay, mixed signals much. Yeah, Chris bound her for safety. Meanwhile, our nonchalant anti-hero toyed with a glowing orb, a nifty gadget for mimicking voices. Channeling his inner Marissa, he prank-called her squad using the orb, ordering them to go scout the cliff. Her team was totally bewildered, but Chris just snickered in the shadows, pleased with his little deception. He figured dodging the notorious ultimate poison dark magic family right now was the smart play, and booked it through the woods. Big brain time, he recalled that Relic's god-tier loot dropped by demons or saints sometimes just rained down for mortals to brawl over. Today's jackpot, the legendary Amulet of Twilight. According to Lena, the queen of dark gossip, nobody actually knew what this mysterious trinket did. Some dude named Marquis Langham cracked the code after endless grinding, but it cost the family head his life. Chris refused to let Nordiani bite the dust. Someone's got to delay the apocalypse, so snatching that relic was priority number one. Touching down, he spotted sketchy footprints. Weird because humans get folded instantly in this demon realm. So what gives relics don't have legs, fam? Sus levels rising, he popped an invisibility spell and stalked the trail. Up ahead, he spotted a villain vibe checking with two mysterious cloaked lackeys. They'd secured the loot box and were playing the waiting game. Chris zipped close, eavesdropping and sensing their aura. Definitely goons from the ultimate poison dark magic family. One heavy hitter was rocking 4-star energy. The female mage was even scarier 5-star tier. But the main villain felt off, like he didn't belong. Blue-haired boy was salty, raging about Marissa's screw-up and wishing she'd just expire already. Chris pegged him as a Nepo baby directly from the main poison bloodline. Their master plan, delete the competition and jack the artifact. The guy planned to gift it to Viscount Langham after dealing with Marissa, but now he was just over it. He just wanted the job done. He commanded his minions to hunt the girl down, leaving Mr. Blue Hair all by his lonesome. Strategy time. Our boy plotted should he throw hands head-on or go full ninja assassin. But then he spotted something hilarious in the canopy. While the baddie sat there yawning, splat, something nasty dripped on his head. He looked up, surprise, demonic monkeys. The apes went ballistic, screeching and dive-bombing him like it was a mosh pit. Blue Hair panicked, flailing and screaming as the beasts swarmed him. Chris smirked from the shadows, mind-controlled a monkey, and yoink swiped the real relic box. Amidst the mayhem, he decided to troll these clowns a bit harder. He unclasped a magical storage necklace. He never thought he'd burn this cooldown just to prank a villain. Since it could hold a 4-star beast, stashing a box was child's play. He summoned the inventory. He secured the loot inside and swapped in that junk replica from Ruina. Now the bad guys would be fighting over a prop. Genius. Chris dipped out and cracked open the real prize. He hyped himself up for the mighty Amulet of Twilight, but his jaw hit the floor. The box was empty. Well, not empty. It held a frilly blue and gold garter belt. You kidding me? Back at the tree, Marissa woke up feeling like absolute trash memories of Chris flashing back. Furious, she mentally screamed at that useless brat to rot in hell. But then, a brunette named Melon materialized out of nowhere, staring her down. Melon asked if she repped the ultimate poison dark magic family. Marissa, totally lost, snapped back. Who's asking? Elsewhere, the dark mage squad was still scouring the woods for the goods. Jupiel clutched Chris's antidote, but side-eyed it hard. Why trust a word that Sketchball says everyone else was coming up empty-handed? Rowan wondered, is our boy gonna survive solo? But Jupiel put on a brave face. She claimed she didn't care. If Chris wanted to play hero and get deleted, that was on him. That blunder was definitely on him, wasn't it? Just then, another teammate sprinted up, clutching what looked like the relic box. The vibe instantly shifted to pure hype. Jupian figured the mission was a wrap, relieved they had secured the prize, even though the audience knows that thing is a total fake. Before the ultimate poison dark magic family could react, she ordered the squad to relay a message. Regroup at the Lacus rendezvous point. Rowing barked the commands and everyone geared up to roll out chests, puffed out with pride. But while navigating a claustrophobic canyon, the team started running their mouths. One guy was flexing, convinced they had crushed the rival clan. Another whispered about Chris potentially being dead, pretty grim stuff. Rowan offered to double back, but Jupian ordered teams 1 and 2 to stay put and sweep for Chris. Her logic, even if the guy was useless, he was still family. Leaving him behind, or even just his corpse, would be a massive stain on their reputation. Suddenly, all hell broke loose. The canyon walls started crumbling. Massive boulders crashed down, sealing the exits. Then, distinct green gas and blue smoke began billowing from the cracks. Jupian screamed out the warning ambush. Squad members started hacking up lungs and dropping like flies. High above on the ridge, a female assassin and her hooded goons peered down, looking absolutely menacing. The assassin announced their doom. She revealed the blue toxin was the blue flower, Marissa's signature creation, framing Marissa perfectly for this massacre. She knew attacking the Dark Mage family in the open was a gamble, but for a total squad wipe, this was the most efficient play. She debated dragging the relic back to Marissa's lab to really sell the narrative of her being the killer. But out of nowhere, a dagger whistled through the air, forcing her to deflect. Surprised the Dark Mage family wasn't fully cooked yet, survivors started staggering to their feet. Jupian, fighting through the coughs, identified the attackers as the ultimate poison, Dark Magic family. She shouted that this was a massive violation of the rules. Her teammates were still reeling, leaving the assassin stunned that anyone was still breathing. That poison was supposed to be incurable. Jupian wondered aloud if that medicine Chris handed out was actually the MVP here. She started realizing that maybe Chris wasn't such a trash person after all. The assassin decided she had to get her hands dirty, and leaped into the fray to take out Jupian. Jupian stood her ground yelling defiance, but unfortunately, the power gap was too wide and she was quickly overwhelmed. Just as the assassin prepped the finishing blow, a volley of needles forced her back. Melon and Marissa burst onto the scene like total legends ready to throw hands. Melon called out to Marissa, keeping the banter light, but Marissa wasn't here for small talk. She locked eyes with the assassin, demanding to know why her signature blue flower poison was in play, asking for a name and a handler. The assassin just smirked, asking if Marissa was seriously this clueless about the situation. Then she summoned her backup. An all-out brawl erupted. Melon quickly realized the enemy squad was stacked 2 3-star dark mages and a 4-star boss, completely outclassing their crew. She realized the enemy had done their recon, pinpointing exactly where the dark mage family was lacking in high-tier firepower. Jupian started spiraling, convinced this was the end of the line for all of them. But then a super smug voice echoed from above. Who else? It was Chris. He was perched on the cliff edge, overlooking the chaos, looking unbothered, and way too cool, calling this meeting an incredible coincidence. Marissa and Jupian spotted him and simultaneously shouted, shocked, Christian. Yeah, the guy always knew how to make a cinematic entrance. Gazing down at the battlefield, he teased the group, saying they must have been desperate to see him. Immediately, Marissa and Jupian shut that down. Marissa snapped that he had some serious explaining to do later, clearly fuming. Just then, the female assassin cackled at the group. She thought the squad below was finished, and scoffed that adding another useless scrub to the mix wouldn't change the outcome. That comment struck a nerve with Marissa, but she knew the villain wasn't wrong. She thought to herself that once a fighter hits 5-star status, they evolve into a completely different beast, something lethal. Even with their combined teamwork, stopping this monster felt impossible. The assassin started gloating, high on her own supply, thinking her rank made her untouchable. But then the script flipped. Chris called the enemy's strategy sloppy and tossed 2 glowing relics down to his allies. Marissa caught a golden frog on a green ribbon. Melon snagged a sparkling necklace, and Jupian grabbed some strange amulet. Right, those artifacts were from Ruina. The squad stared at the loot, completely bewildered. Marissa wondered what on earth she was holding. Chris just smirked, casually bragging that these relics were cheat codes, instantly boosting a user's power by 1 full level. Jupian slapped that relic on and boom, a shockwave of violet energy detonated from her core. She tried to play it off, acting like she hated the fit, but we all saw that surge hit her like a freight train. Marissa was the only one eyeing her sideways, wondering if this was a buff or a straight-up curse. The vibes were definitely off. Meanwhile, Melon strapped on her necklace and felt the voltage spike. Cut to black flashback time. We see Chris's pops grilling Melon earlier. Then Chris stepped in, dropping the bomb that someone was gunning for the headmaster's throne, and he needed her firepower to stop it. Snap back to reality. Melon pressed Chris on where he even copped a relic like that. Our boy just smirked, admitting he finessed it off some sucker. Then Chris hit them with a casual shrug, said he had business to handle, and turned to leave. Melon wasn't having any of that nonsense. She screamed that once the dust settled, she was going to make him pay for this stunt. But Chris, absolute troll that he is, just waved and said, "Catch you later, assuming we don't die." Then he literally yeeted himself off the cliff edge. Marissa's jaw hit the floor. She started screaming that he was supposed to carry the squad, but he just ditched them cold. Jupian, though, she stayed icy. She sensed Chris was playing 5D chess and told everyone to trust the process. Marissa couldn't grasp why Jupian was suddenly riding with Chris. Then the female assassin chimed in, saying that shiny new toy was just giving them false hope. Suddenly, the enemy squad powered up, dark auras flaring. Marissa started sweating bullets, realizing that kind of pressure only drops from rare 5-star threats. But Melon kept it 100. She recalled Chris's golden rule: rank is just a number. It's the ego trippers who always fumble the bag. Chris loved humbling, cocky fighters with pure skill, not just raw stats. That thought got the whole squad locked in. The assassin scoffed, calling them delusional. And just like that, it was go time. The enemy launched a spinning death-top attack, screaming for blood. She punted Melon so hard she went airborne. She unleashed a barrage of energy blades, snagging a hit on Melon's shoulder. Then the trash talk started. She called Melon mid, claiming she didn't need to see the Black Swamp Knights to know they were overhyped. Melon just cackled in her face. "You sure you're really 5-star material?" She claimed that Cut was so weak it tickled. Suddenly she fired back. A massive tsunami of green energy slammed into the assassin. The killer stumbled, clutching her ribs, confused why a measly 4-star curse was doing real damage. Melon flashed a wicked grin. This relic wasn't a stat boost, it amplified her curse using her own blood as fuel. Panic started setting in for the assassin. She realized she'd been baited. Melon yelled it was time to wrap this up and charged. She delivered a brutal slash across the chest. The enemy sidekick screamed for their captain, but Jupian barked at the team to stay focused. Cut to a different part of the woods. Chris was on a solo mission, hunting for a specific target. He hollered out into the trees, asking if they were done playing this lame game of hide and seek. Was this hidden enemy camping tactically, or just too chicken to face the music? Right on cue, the final boss, the guy in the sleek black mask, spawned behind Chris. Most people would jump, but Chris just spun around and said, "Finally." Honestly, Chris looked chill, but you could tell something smelled fishy to him. He called out the elephant in the room. This guy wasn't running the standard ultimate poison dark magic loadout. But the mystery man gave him the silent treatment. When Chris realized he wasn't getting answers, he decided to troll him. He snatched a pebble off the ground and flicked it with bullet velocity, way harder than physics should allow. The man had to pull a matrix dodge. Chris unleashed a rapid-fire barrage, and the last stone smacked the guy right in the face. He staggered back. Oof. That's when Chris started offering some free combat coaching. "Brother Eshud," he grinned, explaining that Eshud always hikes his shoulder when he's nervous, and when he loses focus, his eyes go crazy. Chris told him to fix that tell before it gets him killed. Dang, roasting the man mid-fight, ruthless. The mystery man ripped off his ruined mask and face reveal. It was totally Eshud. Chris just stared him down, waiting for the next move. Flashback time. Viscount Langham, in his plush office, barking orders at his son. He figured the poison mage could handle the girls, but he ordered Eshud to tail Chris, just to make sure he didn't pull a vanishing act like Mora. Back to now, Eshud looked battered and salty. He knew this mission was a total snafu. His orders were leave no survivors, and he was failing hard. Flashbacks of his subordinates' warning replayed in his mind. The guy said the plan was crumbling. Jupian's squad was still standing. With Melon interfering, a total team wipe was looking impossible. And if Christian died right here, the heat would come down on them hard. Eshud realized this was a nightmare scenario, especially because his disappearance would drag his dad straight into the crossfire. Big yikes. Suddenly, Chris broke the silence, asking why Eshud was frozen like a deer in headlights. Our boy smirked, teasing him. "What's wrong? Lose your nerve." Eshud's expression hardened as he decided to throw hands now and worry about the fallout later. He flared his intense dark mana, and the air got heavy. He lunged at Chris, spawning 2 shadow clones mid-air. A synchronized 3-way assault. It looked like straight-up hacks, totally unfair. But Chris didn't even flinch. He drew his blade, crackling with purple energy, and parried the strikes. Then the real Eshud dove in, screaming for Chris to drop dead. Just as the blade made contact, poof, Eshud vanished. Classic speedster move. He materialized behind Chris like a total ninja. Bam, a direct hit. But wait, Chris was still standing. He unveiled his true weapon, a dark sword swirling with a tornado of violet and black energy. Eshud's eyes popped out of his skull. What is that power? Chris swung the blade, smashing the earth with enough force to trigger an earthquake. Eshud went ragdolling, coughing up a fountain of blood. Absolute carnage. Lying in the dirt, Eshud couldn't process the reality. Defeated by a branch family, nobody, impossible. Chris looked down at the wreck and told him to just take the L with dignity. He offered a deal, admit defeat, and he'd let it slide. But Eshud's pride wouldn't let him quit. Paranoia crept in. Does Chris know the secret plan Eshud wanted to? Silence him permanently to hide the evidence? But he hesitated. Chris was too OP to deal with, and Eshud was barely holding it together. So he switched up his act, thanking Chris for saving his reputation. Total snake move. Chris grinned, offering a helping hand. Mercy, right, then plot twist. He played Eshud like a fiddle. The helping hand flared with purple nuke energy. CK. The magic blasted Eshud backward, forcing him to spew even more red liquid. Eshud lost it, screaming every curse word in the book. Internally, Chris laughed. Everything you just saw was an illusion, bro. Absolute savage. Anyway, fight over. Chris sprinted back to Jupian and Marissa. He was low-key annoyed the duel wasted so much time. Hopefully the squad was safe. Suddenly, the gang rushed in, screaming Christian's name like he was on a milk carton. Our boy cringed. They looked hysterical. Marissa, face beet red, yelled that he needed a serious beating for scaring them. Meanwhile, Melon whispered the status report. Chris asked about the loose ends, specifically those dark mages from the Ultimate Poison family. Melon confirmed they were toast, literally turned to ash. Zero evidence left behind. Clean sweep. Solid work, Chris nodded. But Jupian wasn't having it, demanding to know where Chris had vanished to. Chris put on his poker face. Just scouting, chill. Marissa wasn't buying that weak excuse. She eyed his fresh wounds and asked if more family traitors were involved. Chris shut it down gently. He claimed he handled some pests, and whoever he fought was already gone or carried off. He urged them to evacuate fast. But inside, Chris knew this alliance was a total farce. Viscount Langham definitely orchestrated this chaos on purpose. Still, he secured the relic and saved the characters destined to die. That was a win in his book. Flash forward 1 week. Chris sat at a lavish dining table thinking how smoothly the cover-up went. The Poison Magic family lodged a complaint, but the investigation wrapped up quick. Langham had to bury it to save his own skin from the murder plot allegations. Mutually assured destruction. Suddenly Marie broke his train of thought. As always, she was being extra. She whined that while Chris slept like a log, she was in physical pain from his neglect. Chris rolled his eyes, asking if she even had a human heart. Marie leaned in, claiming her heart pounded like a drum for him. She swore she'd love him even if he was a brute. Chris recoiled, totally creeped out. Okay, dial it back, weirdo. Marie is giggling uncontrollably, playing the Here Comes the Airplane game and trying to spoon-feed Chris like he is a literal toddler. Chris turns bright red, swatting her away and grumbling that his hands work just fine. But Marie leans in, teasing him with a mischievous grin, claiming he needs to fuel up. Otherwise, he won't have the stamina to perform at night. Chris does a massive spit take, choking on his food. The guy is completely flustered. That woman has absolutely zero filter. Meanwhile, sitting quietly across the table, Jupian witnesses this entire chaotic mess. Chris tries to change the subject, asking Jupian how long she plans to stick around since she looks pale. But Jupian insists she feels a sense of duty, and isn't leaving until she's sure everything is stable. Suddenly, Marie snaps, slamming her hand down. She screams, asking how Jupian dares to seduce her man right in front of her. But Jupian hits her with the ultimate alpha move, silencing her instantly, and ordering her to fetch some juice. Defeated Marie can only pout and stomp off to the kitchen. Focusing back on the tension, our boy asks if Jupian has anything else to confess. Jupian looks him dead in the eye and says she despises him and genuinely wants to eliminate him one day. Our MC, being totally unbothered, just shrugs and says, cool. But then Jupian's face heats up, and she quietly thanks him for the help. Chris decides to be a total troll, pretending he suddenly went deaf and forces her to repeat the compliment. Jupian stammers, insisting she is only stating the facts about his assistance, and he shouldn't read into it. Classic tsundere behavior. She claims this is the last time she'll be nice, dropping the bombshell that the Marquess has officially agreed to recognize Chris as the family's young lord, for now at least. But stepping into that role means painting a target on his back. Chris internalizes this, realizing the game is about to change the moment he accepts the title. Right now, he is just an NPC to the world, but once he ascends, every shark in the ocean will be circling. He stresses about heavy hitters like Koa, Julian the First Princess with her shadow agendas, Mazak, the explosive third daughter Sarid, the heir of the Berserker clan, and countless others gunning for his head. He briefly wonders if Jupian herself will eventually turn into a boss fight. Jupian breaks his train of thought, smirking and asking if he is staring because she's too pretty. That catches Chris off guard. He starts stuttering, denying it immediately, which makes the atmosphere weird, so he tries to bail. Jupian exits first, leaving Chris mentally drained. He mutters about needing to recharge, and goes back to shoveling food into his mouth. But just then, another shadow looms over his dining table. Chris feels his blood pressure spike. Can't a guy eat a meal in peace without getting ambushed? He looks up to see who the new headache is, and it is Marissa. She is trying way too hard to look casual, awkwardly asking if he is recovering well. Chris, still sporting a bandage on his cheek, nods and says he is alive and kicking. Internally, Chris is spiraling. Why is she here? Is she holding a grudge because he tied her up during the last mission? Honestly, he is sweating bullets. However, Marissa drops the act and admits she is only here on her father's orders. This sends Chris into a full-blown panic because Marissa's dad is Duke Huam. We aren't talking about some minor noble. This guy is the head of the ultimate poison dark magic family, and a literal 8-star demon lord. Chris thinks, why does a monster like that want to chat with me? Before he can run, they are walking down a luxurious, intimidating hallway. Marissa breaks the silence, asking how he knew they were being targeted back then. Chris keeps it vague, claiming he just had intel. Marissa looks down, flashing back to the moment she was bound to a tree while Melon introduced herself. As the vice commander of the Dark Mages Knights, Melon had explained that Chris ordered the stealth mission because a sniper was hunting the team. Chris had arranged for Melon to protect Marissa, the high-value target of a powerful house. Back in the present, Marissa's mind is racing. She confronts him, asking, if you knew all that, why did you have to tie me up like that? Why not just warn me? Chris finally drops the act and confesses he was genuinely terrified for her safety. If her own family was the true villain, she would have been in the crosshairs as the direct successor. He had to take extreme measures. Hearing this, Marissa is stunned. Her face flushes pink, and she whispers a thank you for saving everyone. Chris brushes it off, saying it was natural because she is important to him. Boom. Direct hit. Marissa is internally screaming. She thought they were done, but now he is dropping smooth lines. Is the romance arc back on? But Chris, being the densest protagonist alive, kills the mood instantly. He clarifies that they should have a strictly political alliance. Marissa looks like she just took physical damage. Chris is basically telling her, trust me, bro. He implies she doesn't need to visit just because of their past engagement. He is trying so hard to convince her that they are better off as professional strangers. This guy has the romantic IQ of a rock. Marissa facepalms for a split second, then forces a terrifying smile and agrees to the terms. She says it is for the greater good of their houses. Chris can't tell if he just dodged a bullet or stepped on a landmine, but there is no turning back. They reach the massive double doors. Marissa announces their arrival. Inside sits Duke Huang, grinning like a final boss, but giving off wholesome dad energy. He even insists Marissa call him dad instead of patriarch. Marissa scolds him, telling him to maintain some dignity in front of their guest. But the Duke just laughs it off and invites everyone to take a seat for dinner. Watching the scene unfold from the sidelines, Chris couldn't believe his eyes. The vibes between these two were immaculate, way smoother than he ever predicted. Who knew the nightmare-inducing Duke Huan had a secret wholesome dad mode? Once Marissa exited the stage, Chris wasted no time dropping into a respectful 90-degree bow. The Duke played it chill for a split second before the temperature in the room dropped below freezing. His eyes narrowed, reminding Chris that the past drama with Marissa wasn't water under the bridge just yet. He tossed out a terrifying little joke, casually mentioning he'd slice Chris in two like a bird if he ever shapeshifted again. You know, just for old time's sake. But then the tension snapped. He admitted Chris saved Marissa, so he was willing to let the beef slide. However, the Duke didn't do favors for free. He leaned in, eyes sharp, drilling Chris about his shady links to the legendary Divine Physician family. Chris didn't flinch. He spun a tale about snagging the antidote at an auction, claiming it was authentic goods from the Divine Physicians themselves. Nice try, but rookie mistake. The Duke's family keeps tabs on every shadow moving through the dark auctions. He called the bluff immediately. Those holy meds vanished from the market ages ago. He demanded the truth. Where did you really get it? Crap. The pressure was on. Cornered, our boy Chris had to improvise a wild backstory on the fly. He looked the Duke dead in the eye and flexed hard, claiming he was the genius who brewed the cure himself. The Duke looked skeptical, to say the least. Crafting an antidote requires god-tier knowledge of poisons. Chris basically shrugged and said, I'm just built different. I read a book and figured it out. Talk about a massive ego trip. But instead of exploding, Duke Huan threw his head back and roared with laughter. Since being a genius isn't illegal, he decided to stop pressing for the source. Chris practically collapsed with relief. He thought he survived the boss fight, but the Duke had one final combo move. He looked at Chris and asked, how about joining the lethal poison demon family? Wait, say, what now? Meanwhile, the vibe check in another part of the mansion was failing hard. Marchioness Freya stormed into Viscount Langham's office like a hurricane. She slammed her palm on the mahogany desk, screaming that Eshud's core was shattered, and pointing the finger straight at Chris. Langham didn't even flinch. He sat there stone cold and told her to lower her volume. Freya was spiraling. She questioned if Chris was seriously about to get the heir title, ranting about how it would trash the reputation of their dark mage lineage. Seeing no help coming, Freya decided it was time to get her hands dirty. That duke title belonged to her son by birthright, not some upstart brat from a branch family. Viscount Langham gave zero reaction. He told her she could do whatever she wanted. He wouldn't help, but he wouldn't stop her either. His eyes drifted back to the chessboard. One thing was clear, Chris was no longer a pawn. He was the dark horse threatening to flip the entire board.